Chapter 311. 3 days after the end of the combat examination. The street in front of the examination hall was packed with people. From the end of the street to the end, it was filled with people. Today was the day of the announcement of the written examination results. Because the results of the combat examination were only for reference, and did not affect the results of the imperial examinations, the ranking of the written examination was the final ranking of the imperial examinations. The array outside the examination hall would disperse after the announcement of the results at noon. In order to ensure the fairness of the marking, no one could enter or leave the examination hall in the past 3 days. The officials of the imperial court, even the empress, did not know the results of the imperial examinations. There was still 15 minutes before the announcement of the results. The crowd gathered outside the array and discussed animatedly. I wonder who will be the top scorer of the written examination this time. If he can become the top scorer of the written examination, his future will be limitless. Is there a need to guess? The top scorer will definitely be one of the 3. Who else can beat them? Although the results of the written examination had not been announced, the crowd already had their guesses about who the top scorer would be. The Zhou brothers and the Southern Prince were the most outstanding students in their respective academies. Their literary talents were outstanding, and their cultivations could be considered as the top prodigies of the Great Zhou. As potential candidates for the future crown prince of the Great Zhou, the education they received and the resources they enjoyed were far superior to those of the top-notch families in the Great Zhou. If there were no surprises, the top scorer of the written examination would definitely be one of the 3. Zhou Zheng, Zhou Feng, and the Southern Prince were also in the crowd. Originally, they did not need to come personally. Even if they stayed in their manners, they would know the results the moment the examination hall's array was activated. However, the results this time were extremely important to them. If they could obtain the position of the theory examination's top scorer in front of everyone, it would greatly benefit their future. The people of the world naturally hoped that a more talented emperor would appear in the Great Zhou. This would be an invisible bargaining chip in the process of competing for the crown prince. It would also be a good story after they ascended the throne. The 3 of them looked calmly at the entrance of the examination hall. However, deep in their hearts, they were not as calm as they appeared. The students outside the examination hall were all as nervous as them. Buzz, noon had just arrived when the sound of a bell came from within the examination hall. After the sound of the bell, the doors of the examination hall that had been closed for 3 days slowly opened. Countless officials walked out from within. The Minister of Rites walked up to the array and formed a hand seal. The array dissipated. He looked at the many examinees in front of him and said, "It's time. Put up the notice." The Minister of Rites' voice was loud and clear, spreading in all directions. Not long after he finished speaking, hundreds of golden rays were fired into the sky. These golden lights shot up into the sky and exploded, forming huge golden characters that floated in the void, emitting a faint glow. Those were the names of the examinees who had passed the imperial examination. At the very front of the 100 names was the words Ascension Rankings. The Azure Cloud Rankings had the meaning of one step into the clouds. It implied that those on the rankings would have a meteoric rise in their career. At this moment, the entire divine capital saw the strange phenomenon in the sky. The words were condensed in the air using a great supernatural power. Everyone could see the Azure Cloud leaderboard clearly from all directions of the divine capital. In their eyes, the Azure Cloud leaderboard was always right in front of them. Since the Ascension Rankings had been released, countless examinees immediately shot their gazes over. On the Azure Cloud Rankings, the font of the first name at the top was larger and brighter than all the other names. That was the honor of being the top scholar of the written examination. The 2 words Li Mu were clearly reflected in everyone's eyes. After a short moment of silence, countless exclamations erupted from all corners of the divine capital. Outside the examination hall, many examinees were in disbelief. Why is it him again? How is this possible? He's the top scholar of both the written examination and the combat examination. In the combat examination 3 days ago, many examinees had seen the scene of Li Mu fighting with the examiner. Scholars pursued elegance, while cultivators were more proficient in supernatural powers and spells. They would also try their best to avoid close combat. After the combat examination, everyone's impression of him was that he was a boorish man, a refined beast. However, 3 days later, Li Mu showed another side of him in front of them. Everyone had taken the written examination and knew how difficult the questions were. It was impossible to get first place in the written examination without real talent. In the past, they only knew that Li Mu was brave and fearless. Now they knew that he was well-versed in both the pen and the sword. At the same time, every corner of the divine capital was filled with the surprised cries of the people. It's Constable Li. Constable Li is the top scholar of the imperial examination. He's the top scholar of both the martial and literary examinations. What can Constable Li not do? I can't call him Constable Li anymore. I have to call him the top scholar. Sigh, I regret it. Constable Li is still unmarried. This time, many people will want to marry their daughters to him. I'm afraid there's no hope for the 2 beautiful girls in my family. In the divine capital, Li Mu was the protector of the people. Countless people were sincerely happy for him. In front of the examination hall, the Zhou brothers and Prince Nan's crown prince looked at the 2 shining golden words in the sky. They felt that they were abnormally dazzling. It was one thing to be the top scholar of martial arts, but even the title of top scholar of literature had been snatched by Li Mu. This made the 3 of them lose all face. They had received the best education since they were young and enjoyed the best resources. In terms of writing and martial arts, they did not lose to any of their peers or even their elders. However, they had lost to a junior who they did not even know a few months ago. This was a reality that the 3 of them found hard to accept. However, at this point, they had to accept it even if they did not want to. Fortunately, Li Mu's name was known throughout the divine capital. He was also the Empress' favorite subject. If he was mediocre, wouldn't it mean that the Empress did not have a good eye for talent? Li Mu's reputation had already spread far and wide. It was still acceptable to lose to him. However, if they lost to some unknown person, it would be truly humiliating. There was no need to ask for the top scholar of literature. They just wanted to see who got the second place. The 3 of them looked to the left. To the left of the top scholar was the name of the second place. In the next moment, extreme shock appeared on the faces of the 3 people at the same time. It really was Li Si. The 3 of them were dumbfounded when they saw the second shining name on the azure sky roll. It was fine if it was Li Mu, but where did this Li Si come from? Like the Zhou brothers and Prince Nan's crown prince, the other candidates in front of the examination hall, and the people of the divine capital were also puzzled. Compared to the top scholar of the theory examination, the name of the second place was too unfamiliar and too ordinary. Li Si was a name that people would believe even if they said that he was a dog on the streets of the divine capital. However, as the second place in the theory examination, they felt that it was lacking in style. More importantly, no one had ever heard of his name before, whether it was the people present or the people of the divine capital. After Li Si, there was no suspense in the rankings. Third place in the theory examination, Zhou clan's Zhou Zheng. Fourth place in the theory examination, Prince Nan's crown prince Xiao Yu. Fifth place in the theory examination, Zhou clan's Zhou Feng. To others, this was a good result that could bring glory to their ancestors. However, to these 3 people, it was no different from a humiliation. The 3 of them quickly left. The remaining people were either happy or sad. My name is up there. I'm ranked 73rd. Sigh, I didn't. Neither did I. Looks like I'll have to take the exam next time. Who is that Li Si? Is he here? Can he show himself? At the very back of the crowd, a figure slowly walked away. He came to a mansion in the northern court and knocked on the door. The one who opened the door was Li Mu. Li Si stood at the door and said, "Congratulations, top scholar of both the civil and martial examinations." Li Mu invited him in and said, "You're not bad either." Li Si being able to get second place in the theory examination was something that Li Mu had not expected. The Ministry of Rights had already given out the books that the candidates had taken. Although Li Mu had highlighted some important points for Li Si, it was not everything. More than 90% of the reason why Li Si was able to pass the imperial examination and get second place in the theory examination was due to his own hard work. Li Mu knew Li Si very well. Normally, Li Si looked sloppy and carefree, going in and out of the brothel every few days without any self-control. However, as long as he was determined to do something, even Li Mu would be ashamed of his perseverance and determination. From sleeping in the brothel every night to not even looking at the brothel when he passed by, it was only a matter of a thought from him. When he decided to take the imperial examination, he locked himself in the inn and did not leave the inn for 2 months. If he asked himself honestly, Li Mu would not be able to do it. Although his cultivation was not high, he always gave Li Mu an unfathomable feeling. Li Mu walked into the courtyard and looked around. He saw an unfamiliar figure and asked, "Is there a guest in the house?" The empress was in the middle of planting flowers in the garden. Li Mu coughed lightly and said, "That is Miss Zhou, a friend of mine." Li Si looked in the direction of the garden, and his eyes showed understanding. He then said, "I just want to congratulate you. If there is nothing else, I will go back first. The results of the imperial examination are out, and I have to send a message to my father-in-law." Li Mu sent him out. When they reached the door, Li Si asked, "She is a friend of that friend of yours, right?" Li Mu nodded. Li Si looked at him meaningfully and said, "That friend of yours is very lucky." Li Mu was puzzled and asked, "What do you mean?" Li Si looked ahead and said, "I can see that she is very arrogant. This kind of arrogance comes from her bones. If she is not a noble lady, she will not have this kind of temperament." Li Mu nodded. In the past, the empress was a noble lady. Now she was the biggest noble lady. She had the right to be arrogant in front of anyone. Li Si continued, "She is very arrogant and very lonely. This kind of loneliness even surpasses arrogance." Li Mu also wanted to learn this from Li Si. He had interacted with the empress for a long time, and only then did he slowly understand her loneliness. Li Si had only taken a single look at her, and was able to see these things. This was something that no mystical power could achieve. Li Si looked at Li Mu one last time and said, "She is so lonely. She should not have any family or friends by her side. This kind of woman yearns for the nourishment of love. If you treat her well, she will repay you 10 times or even more. This kind of woman is the easiest to woo." Chapter 312. Li Mu wanted to remind Li Si not to say anything out loud, but it was clearly too late. The empress couldn't know everything that happened in the Immortal's capital, but in this courtyard nothing could escape her ears. Disaster comes from the mouth. If a person could control their mouth, they would be able to avoid many unnecessary disasters. Li Si left and everything seemed to be fine. But Li Mu knew that something was brewing in the dark. Sure enough, just as he approached the courtyard, the empress walked out of the garden and asked, "What were you talking about?" Li Mu said nervously, "Li Si can't control his mouth. Your Majesty is a magnanimous person, so please don't lower yourself to his level." "Your Majesty, what do you want to eat today? I'll make it for you." Zhou glanced at him and said, "I heard Xiaobai say that there's a dish called Wuxia tofu. How come I've never heard of it?" Li Mu said, "I'll go buy some tofu now." The empress liked to eat tofu, so Li Mu made her tofu every day, and the dish was different every day. With the frequency of the empress coming to Li Mu's residence, it wouldn't be long before all the tofu dishes in Li Mu's mind would be squeezed dry by her. Although Wuxia tofu was a test of knife skills, it wasn't difficult for the current Li Mu. A divine ability cultivator could control their body to a very delicate level. There was no more tofu in the house, so he walked out and prepared to buy a piece on the street. Not long after, he saw a person crawling out of a ditch on the side of the road. The man's body was covered in vegetable leaves and dirty water. Even from afar, Li Mu could smell the stench. He immediately held his breath. Just as he was about to leave, he took a closer look and realized that it was Li Si. Li Mu was stunned. "What's wrong with you?" Li Si shook his head and said, "I was walking on the road and accidentally stepped on air. I'll go to your house to wash up and change my clothes." "There's no need. Let's do it here." Li Mu formed a seal with both hands, and a water column condensed in the void. It poured down from the top of Li Si's head, and washed away the filth on his body. How could a mighty assembled spirit cultivator fall into a ditch by the roadside for no reason? Li Si was not surprised by this at all, as if he really treated it as an ordinary accident. Li Mu couldn't think of anyone else who could do this without anyone noticing. No one knew better than him how petty the Empress was. If Li Si were to return to the Li residence, it would not be as simple as falling into the gutter. He waved his hand to disperse the stench around him and said, "When you see Miss Zhou in the future, don't shoot your mouth off. She has a powerful background. With just a thought, she can make you unable to survive in Fairy's capital." In the sky above the Fairy's capital, the names on the honor roll were still shining with golden light. This list would stay in the air for 3 days. Every name on it would be bestowed with glory. At the entrance of the examination hall, countless examinees sighed and left. The way of the imperial examination was like 1,000 soldiers and 10,000 horses crossing a single wooden bridge. Only 1 out of 10 people would be able to make it on the list. This was only the first year. In future imperial examinations, the various counties would be able to recommend more talents. It would probably be 1 out of 100, or even 1 out of 100. Those who made it on the list naturally had limitless glory, but they were in the minority. Most of the examinees were just accompanying them. After the examinees left, the officials of the various ministries walked out of the examination hall. An official from the Ministry of Revenue shook his head and said, "The competition for the imperial examination is too cruel. Many examinees who scored full marks in mathematics could only miss the list because of criminal law." Another official said, "The questions on criminal law are too difficult. I've seen the test paper. Even if I did it myself, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to pass. Who knew that there are so many twists and turns in criminal law?" An official sighed and said, "Lord Li was able to score full marks in the criminal law exam paper. This is simply unimaginable. He really is worthy of being the person that the emperor values." The director of the Ministry of Justice was also somewhat regretful. He said, "The majority of the examinees put their focus on policy questions. There aren't many who are truly willing to settle down and study criminal law. It's so hard to find someone who only answered 1 question wrong. His mathematics and policy questions are too mediocre. He has no chance of making it onto the list. What a pity, what a pity." At the entrance of the examination hall, Wei Peng raised his head and looked at the list in the sky. He shook his head and left. Suddenly, a voice came from behind him. For the criminal law exam, Li Mu scored full marks. "You scored 95. Do you know where you went wrong?" Wei Peng turned his head and bowed to Zhou Zhong. He said, "Please enlighten me." Zhou Zhong said lightly, "A woman was walking at night and met the villain Zhang San. He wanted to rape her. This woman pretended to agree and first tricked Zhang San to the river. While he was undressing, she pushed him into the river. Zhang San wanted to go ashore many times but was stopped by the woman. In the end, Zhang San was washed away and drowned. Zhang San's family reported this woman to the Ministry of Justice and asked her what crime she committed. If you were an official of the Ministry of Justice, how would you judge the case?" Wei Peng said, "Excessive self-defense is the crime of murder. But considering that Zhang San committed the crime first, the woman could be given a lighter sentence." Zhou Zhong said, "Li Mu's answer is not guilty. Li Mu scored full marks for criminal law." This meant that the Ministry of Justice also believed that the woman was not guilty. This was far from Wei Peng's judgment. Wei Peng raised his head and said, "I don't understand. The law says that a human life is greater than the heavens. That woman had already defended herself. There was no need to stop Zhang San from saving himself. In the end he drowned. Even if it wasn't intentional murder, it was negligent homicide." Zhou Zhong asked, "If you were that woman, what would you have done?" Wei Peng thought for a moment and said, "After pushing Zhang Shan into the river, I would immediately run away." "Run?" Zhou Zhong looked at him and asked, "When Zhang San comes ashore, it won't be long before a weak woman like you. Even if you run a few dozen steps ahead, what can you do? He will still catch up to you. When that time comes, what do you think will happen to you?" Wei Peng was stunned. Clearly, he didn't think of such a situation in the examination hall. After he came to his senses, he lowered his head and said, I would be raped." Zhou Zhong said lightly, "If you were Zhang San and were tricked by a weak woman, pushed into the river and almost drowned, what would you do when you crawled out of the river and caught up to her?" In the past, Wei Peng was just a bit of a playboy. He would never rape a woman. With his status, he could have as many women as he wanted. When he told Wei Peng about his identity as Zhang San, Wei Peng was suddenly startled awake. For a villain who would block a woman's way in the middle of the night and attempt to rape her, if he was plotted against instead and almost lost his life, after he escaped from the trap, he would fly into a rage out of humiliation. His original plan to rape her might turn into murder. He finally realized where he was wrong. He protected the law, while Li Mu protected the people. In his heart, there was only the law and that one life. He didn't consider the actual situation of the case. In that situation, the only way for the woman to save her life was to stop Zhang San from going ashore. Zhou Zhong said lightly, "There are many officials in the Ministry of Justice who can recite the law of the Great Zhou backwards, but they still can't be good officials. This is because they are too proficient in the law. They only know how to use the law to judge cases, and thus lose their humanity. For this kind of case, if you judge it from the perspective of hindsight, you will get the same result as you." Wei Peng bowed and said, "This student understands." Zhou Zhong suddenly asked, "Why do you want to study the law?" Wei Peng thought for a while, then shook his head and said, "I don't know. At first, I wanted to protect myself and not be bullied by Li Mu. Later, I felt that the law was quite interesting." "Interesting?" Zhou Zhong looked at him lightly and said, "If you want to be an official, come find me at the Ministry of Justice tomorrow morning." The results of the first imperial examination held by the court were announced today. Until night, the 100 golden names were still shining in the night sky. The name of the top scholar, Li Mu, was the biggest and the brightest. As the top scholar in both civil and military affairs, he was naturally the topic of the people's discussion the most. He beat up playboys and punished young villains. He dared to question the officials of the Ministry of Justice, and also dared to scold all the officials in the court. Those who didn't like him talked about him behind his back. They said that other than his good looks, he had no other abilities. They said that he only relied on the support of the Empress. Without the Empress, he was nothing. They said that everything he had today was obtained by flattering the Empress. In this imperial examination, he once again proved himself to the people of the world. He suppressed the students of the 4 great academies, suppressed the talents of the 36 counties, and became the top scholar in both civil and military affairs. He completely shut the mouths of those people. He let the people of the world see clearly why the Empress only favored him out of all the officials in the court. He could bring peace to the world with his pen and settle the world with his military affairs. This was a true talent. He was worthy of the Empress's special favor. The students of the academies and the future crown prince could only serve as a foil in front of him. Of course, Li Mu becoming the top scholar in both civil and military affairs also proved one thing. The Empress had a unique insight. She had discovered Li Mu's talent from the very beginning. It wasn't, as the rumors said, that she was only interested in Li Mu's manliness. After the results of the imperial examination were announced, both the officials and the people couldn't help but praise the Empress in their hearts. Chapter 313. 3 days after the results were announced, all the grand scholars who passed the examination had to face the Empress in the Golden Palace. This was an important ceremony. The purpose of this ceremony was to give them a special honor. For most of them, this might be their only chance to stand here in their lives. On the other hand, the Empress wanted to personally check if there were any spies from other countries, or the demon sect among them. For officials of the 5th level and above, like Cui Ming, if they wanted to hide something, the Empress might not be able to find out. But among these grand scholars, the strongest was only at the 4th level. Before the examination, they had already been tested. Finally, the Empress tested them again. It was almost guaranteed that nothing would go wrong, unless they had a special chant or spell similar to the Clear Heart mantra. After the list of candidates who passed the examination was released, Li Mu looked at it carefully. The students of the White Deer Institute did not participate in the examination. But among the 100 candidates, there were still more than 70. Almost 80% of the grand scholars came from the 3 great institutes. The Empress's purpose of reforming the examination was to break the monopoly of the institutes over the officials in the imperial court. This result seemed to be a failure of Li Mu and her. But compared to the past, it was already a great improvement. Before this, the number was 10%. Now, the monopoly of the institutes had been broken, giving the local talents room to advance. Even if this promotion was very difficult, the imperial examinations were like an army of thousands of men and horses crossing a single wooden bridge. There might be some problems within the three great academies, but the students they taught were indeed the top talents of the great Zhou dynasty. They had to go through years of bitter study and cultivation in the academies, so there was no reason for them to lose to others. Although the results of the examination did not make much of a difference to the institutes, the influence of the examination on the institutes was far-reaching. From now on, the students of the institutes would no longer have an iron rice bowl. If they wanted to enter the imperial court as an official, they would have to compete with countless talents in the Great Zhou. Because there was no pressure within the institutes, some of the unhealthy practices would gradually be alleviated. After the examination, the candidates who failed would gradually leave the divine capital. These 100 grand scholars would also be given official positions by the imperial court. According to the rankings, the top scholar of the written examination would be given a 5th rank official position. It was rare to see someone who had no official position directly get a 5th rank official position in the history of the imperial court. One had to know that Zhang Chun had toiled for more than 10 years, and was only a rank 5. From this, it could be seen that the imperial court attached great importance to the imperial examination. If one could stand out among the talents of the 36 counties and the students of the academy, it could be said that he had a meteoric rise. Those who placed 2nd and 3rd in the written examination would be granted official positions of grade 6. The officials after that were rank 6 and below. Those with good grades could stay in Fairy's capital and be assigned to the 6 ministries or the 9 temples for a year of probation. Those with bad grades would have to go to other places and assume positions such as county deputy or county lieutenant, assisting the county magistrate in governing the local area. They also needed to be probationary for a year. After a year, if they passed the assessment, they could be promoted to official positions. Ever since Cui Ming's official position was abolished, the position of assistant minister of the secretariat was vacant. Lu Yi took his position and became the new assistant minister of the secretariat. As a result, only 5 of the 6 palace secretaries were left. Although the position of the secretary of the secretariat was not high, he had great power. He was in charge of the important affairs of the country. The vacancy of the secretary of the secretariat naturally caused the competition of various forces. Both the new and old parties wanted this position. However, an imperial edict personally written by the empress made them give up on this idea. The new top scholar, Li Mu, would be appointed as the secretary of the secretariat. Before the imperial examination, no matter how much the empress favored Li Mu, letting him take on such an important position would have attracted the opposition of all the court officials. Firstly, Li Mu was not from the 4 great academies. Other than being a low-level imperial censor, he could only be an official and not an official. Secondly, the position of secretary of the secretariat was not something that anyone could take on. One had to have enough talent, keen insight, and the ability to make decisions on important matters of the country. However, after the imperial examination, Li Mu's status as the top scholar in 2 subjects had shut everyone's mouth. In terms of qualifications, he was the top scholar in both civil and military affairs. Whether it was the imperial court or the military, he could go to either. In terms of ability, he scored full marks in all 3 subjects. Questions on policy were his forte. If he did not have the qualifications to be the secretary of the secretariat, no one else could. The empress let Li Mu take part in the imperial examination to give him the qualifications to shut the mouths of the people. Li Mu did not disappoint the empress. He took down 2 top scholars in one go. Those who wanted to oppose the empress had nothing to say. The empress had said before that he would be appointed as the secretary of the secretariat. Li Mu was not surprised by this result. After asking for Li Si's opinion, Li Mu asked the empress to arrange the position of the minister of God's capital for him. The 3 provinces and 6 ministries were filled with intrigue. It was not suitable for Li Si. Old Zhang had to manage the god's capital office and the imperial clan temple. He could not be at two places at once. The positions of Minister of God's Capital and Commandant of God's Capital happened to be vacant. He could share a lot of the burden with Old Zhang. Li Mu did not say anything else. He had no say in these matters. If he said too much, he would be suspected of being a favored official interfering in politics. After becoming the secretary of the Secretariat, Li Mu was no longer a constable of the God's Capital Office. Deputy Constable Sun got what he wanted. He finally got rid of the word deputy and successfully received 5 times the salary. Li Mu handed the constable uniform to the government office. The constables there sent Li Mu off. Goodbye, boss. Boss, come back to the government office often. I wish you a meteoric rise in the future. The God's Capital Office used to be the office with the least sense of existence in the God's Capital. As the constables of the God's Capital Office, the people did not trust them. The constables of the Ministry of Justice looked down on them. Even they themselves were used to it. All this changed after Li Mu came to the God's Capital Office. The God's Capital Office was no longer the cowardly office it used to be. They had beaten up the rich and foppish, and captured the students of the academy. The people would choose the God's Capital Office as their first target. The constables of the Ministry of Justice would no longer look at them differently. Some people had been constables their whole lives before they knew what a constable should be like. Li Mu waved at Wang Wu and the others. He walked out of the God's Capital Office and found that the outside was also crowded with people. Constable Li. Constable Li. Stop calling him Constable Li. Now we have to call him Lord Li or Zhuang Yuan. The people greeted Li Mu. The owner of the noodle stall walked up slowly and asked, Constable Li, are you not going to work in the God's Capital Office anymore? Li Mu knew what they were worried about. He smiled and said, Don't worry. Even if I'm not here, you can still come to the God's Capital Office if you need anything. The God's Capital Magistrate, Lord Zhang Chun, is a good official who loves the people like his own children. The new minister of the God's Capital, Lord Li, is my friend. He hates evil and will stand up for you. If you have any problems that the God's Capital Office can't solve, you can also come to me. When the people heard this, they were obviously relieved. In the past few months, as the people of the God's Capital, they had finally lived a decent life. When they were bullied, they no longer had to be afraid of the other party being the son of an official or the descendant of a noble. That was because they had Constable Li behind them. He used his weak body to hold up the sky for them. There used to be people like him in the God's Capital who brought hope and light to the people. However, those people were like a flash in the pan. They appeared for a short while and disappeared very quickly. Some people died, some were transferred out of the God's Capital. There were also some who gradually stood against the people. Li Mu was the light in the people's hearts. The people of the God's Capital were used to relying on him. Without him, their lives would return to how they were before. It was not easy to obtain light. No one wanted to return to darkness. Li Mu left the God's Capital Office. Along the way, the people sent him off. In the past few months in the God's Capital, the people of the God's Capital could not leave him. In fact, Li Mu could not leave the people of the God's Capital either. Other than the Empress, the immense and continuous psychic power generated by the common people was the greatest shortcut to his cultivation. Up until now, Li Mu's pure yang body could only play a very small role in his cultivation. Although the pure yang body still allowed him to cultivate several times faster than ordinary cultivators, this speed was not even worth mentioning when compared to psychokinesis cultivation. Moreover, the meeting with the Empress in his dreams every night was even more useful to Li Mu. She would teach Li Mu all kinds of supernatural powers and spells step by step. Supernatural powers were not like Taoist techniques. They required comprehension and practice. Most of the time, it would take months for one to grasp the basics of a supernatural power. However, with the Empress's guidance, Li Mu could grasp the basics in 3 days to 1 day. This was also the reason why cultivators fought tooth and nail to join the large sections. With the guidance of a great teacher, they would not take too many detours on the path of cultivation. To Li Mu, joining any sect would not be as convenient as hugging the Empress's thigh. No seventh realm cultivator from the 4 sects and 6 schools could be so attentive to their disciples and teach them diligently every day. After the imperial examinations ended, Li Mu had been appointed to an official position. From the time he was appointed to the position, he had a maximum of 3 months of vacation. During these 3 months, he planned to return to the North County and spend it with Lu Hanyan. At the same time, he wanted to discuss with her whether she could return to the divine capital with him. Now that he had a firm foothold in the divine capital, he could bring her and Wanwan over. Before this, Li Mu still had a knot in his heart that had not been resolved. Ever since Cui Ming escaped, Shangguanli led people to chase after him. 2 months had passed, but there was no progress at all. Every day, Li Mu would check on Su He, who was sleeping in the ice coffin. The medicinal power of the nature pill was healing her soul at every moment. Li Mu could feel that she was not far from waking up. Su He was about to wake up, but there was still no result on Cui Ming's matter. This made Li Mu anxious. He planned to go to Mr. Mei to ask about the situation first. When he arrived in front of Changel Palace, Lord Mei was standing outside with a bronze mirror in his hand. A look of suspicion appeared on his face. Li Mu walked up and asked, "What's wrong?" Mr. Mei put away the bronze mirror and looked worried. He said, "I haven't been able to contact Ali since 3 days ago. I don't know what happened to her. She didn't even have time to reply." Chapter 314. In the time that Shangguanli wasn't in the divine capital, Li Mu had completely replaced her and became the subject closest to the Empress. Although no one could compete with Li Mu for the Empress' favor if she didn't come back, Li Mu didn't want anything to happen to her. Mr. Mei looked at the mirror and frowned. Ali is chasing after Cui Ming this time. She has many internal guards with her. She also has the Fulu and talismans that Her Majesty gave her. Even if she met a 6th realm cultivator, with everyone working together, they would have the power to deal with him. The talisman that she left in the palace doesn't have any abnormalities, and it doesn't seem like anything has happened. But why didn't she reply? Li Mu thought for a moment and asked, "Maybe she didn't have time to send a message." Mr. Mei shook his head. "Ever since she left the divine capital, we've been sending messages every day. This is what we agreed on before we left the capital." Li Mu asked again. Could it be that the message talisman was damaged? Mr. Mei continued shaking his head. This possibility is very small. The most likely possibility is that the place she's at is covered by a powerful formation that can't send messages. Li Mu looked at Mr. Mei and asked, "Where was the last time she replied?" Mr. Mei said, 3 days ago, Yunzhong County. Yunzhong County was adjacent to the North County. Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "How about this? You continue to contact her. I'm going back to the North County anyway, so I'll go to Yunzhong County to take a look. If there's any news about her, I'll report it to Her Majesty immediately." Ever since he got the little conch, Li Mu and the Empress communication became much more convenient. As long as he used his spiritual power, they could chat in real time. It was even more convenient than a phone. The incident with Cui Ming was a great humiliation to the imperial court. If it weren't for the fact that there were so few 6th realm experts in the imperial court, and that all of them held high positions, it would have been possible for them to dispatch 6th realm experts to kill Cui Ming and restore the nation's prestige. Cui Ming was also someone that Li Mu had to kill. Unfortunately, the Empress wanted him to participate in the imperial examinations. Otherwise, when Shangguanli had tried to kill Cui Ming last time, Li Mu had followed her. Now that the imperial examinations were over, Cui Ming had not been caught. He still had a chance to act personally. Before he returned, he had to inform the Empress. Changel Palace. After hearing Li Mu's words, Zhou handed him a jade talisman and said, "This is Ali's life talisman. Hold it in your hand and channel your mana into it. You will be able to sense her position within a certain distance." A life talisman was a special Dharma treasure made of spiritual jade. It contained a drop of the owner's blood essence. Within a short distance, it could sense the location of the owner. However, the most important use of this Dharma treasure was not to sense location, but to sense life. If the owner was seriously injured, cracks would appear on the life talisman. If the owner died, no matter how far away they were, the life talisman would shatter immediately. The owner of the life talisman would also know of the owner's death immediately. However, due to the special nature of blood essence, many evil arts and supernatural powers were performed through blood essence. Cultivators were very wary of giving their blood essence to others. Usually, only the owner's loved ones would have their life talisman. As her competitor, Li Mu had investigated Shangguanli in detail. According to Mr. Mei, she was the Empress' playmate. The two of them had played together since they were young. She was like the Empress' little sister. Li Mu still had a long way to go before he could catch up to her position in the Empress' heart. After all, the Empress had not made a life talisman for him. Li Mu accepted Shangguanli's life talisman and said, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. I will bring Commander Shangguan back safely." Zhou said, "You have to be careful as well. Just in case, I will give you a few more Dharma treasures in Fulu." This was the reason why Li Mu was so loyal to the Empress. She did not paint a big picture or talk about dreams. Every few days she would get a promotion and a raise. She would ask for leave without asking for the reason. She never let him work overtime. Instead, she sacrificed her sleep and taught him supernatural powers and spells late at night. She could bully Li Mu, but no one else could. With a boss like this, Li Mu could work for a lifetime. Although Li Si should not have said those words, he was right. The Empress lacked emotions, so she cherished them even more. As long as someone treated her well, she would return the favor tenfold. Therefore, Li Mu could not help but treat her even better. Zhou took out a few pieces of Fulu and a few Dharma treasures. She also taught Li Mu how to use them. After accepting these things, Li Mu said happily, "Thank you, Your Majesty. If there is nothing else, I will go back first." Zhou thought for a moment and said, "Take a drop of essence blood. I will make a life talisman for you. In the future, if you are in danger, I will be able to sense it." Li Mu decisively cut his finger and forced out a drop of essence blood. Although the life talisman could not save his life, it at least represented the Empress's attitude. Since he set Shangguanli as his goal, he had to have what Shangguanli had. After this thought appeared in his mind, Li Mu felt that something was wrong. It was as if he was competing with Shangguanli for favor in her harem. This made him involuntarily recall the ridiculous dream he had that night. He could not help but shiver and did not dare to think about it anymore. Perhaps, it was because he always wanted to compete with Shangguanli for favor that he had the nightmare of snuggling in the Empress's arms. Not noticing Li Mu's expression, Zhou flipped her hand and a square piece of spirit jade appeared in her hand. She stretched out her index finger and quickly drew a rune in the void. With a light flick of her finger, the golden rune entered the spirit jade. When Li Mu's drop of essence blood merged with the spirit jade, he vaguely felt that there was a subtle connection between him and the jade. Li Mu was shocked and envious of the Empress's magical ability to draw talismans in the void. The cultivators of the upper realm had too many incredible magical abilities. Zhou took Li Mu's life talisman and said, "If there is an accident, contact me at any time with the spirit snail. No matter what happens, remember to protect yourself first." Li Mu, "I understand." Zhou nodded and said, "Go." Li Mu cupped his hands and said, "I will take my leave." After leaving the palace, Li Mu returned home and told Xiao Bai that the two of them were going back to the north region again and would be staying there for 3 months. Xiao Bai heard this and cheered happily. "Then I will go buy some gifts for Sister Lu and Sister Wanwan." Li Mu grabbed her in time and shook his head. "There is no need this time. We still have urgent matters to attend to. Hurry up and pack your things. We will leave now." Shangguanli had lost contact and he did not know what happened. Every time he delayed, she would be in more danger. Xiao Bai quickly packed her things and the two of them left the city. They immediately used a high-grade flight talisman and flew into the sky. Yunzhong region was in the east of the north region. Li Mu first sent Xiao Bai to Fulu school. Lu Hanyan happened to be in seclusion with Yu Zhenzi. Only Wanwan was on Baiyun Peak. Li Mu left Xiao Bai on the peak and flew to the east alone. Chapter 315. Yunzhong Commandery. Yunzhong Commandery was located in the northeast of the Great Zhou. Within Yunzhong Commandery, There were very few plains. There were many forests and strange peaks. Peaks that were thousands of feet tall could be seen everywhere. The peaks were often shrouded in clouds, hence the name Yunzhong. Further east from Yunzhong Commandery was no longer within the Great Zhou. It did not even belong to the Zhou continent. Instead, it was Yingzhou. Compared to Zhou continent, Yingzhou was just a barren land. The environment of Yingzhou was harsh. There were many mountains, swamps, and poisonous miasma. There were no human countries. Even most demons were unwilling to live there. The border between Yunzhong Commandery and Yingzhou was an ancient mountain forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. The trees in the forest were extremely lush. There were often giant trees that were dozens of feet tall, blocking out the sun. Poisonous miasma would begin to rise from the ground 100 feet into the forest. The people of Yunzhong Commandery regarded this place as a forbidden area. At this moment, a figure arrived from outside the forest. When he was about 100 feet away from the forest, he slowly stopped and hovered in the air. Li Mu held a jade talisman in his hand as he gazed into the depths of the forest. He had used 3 days to travel all over Yunzhong Commandery. Shangguan Li's life talisman did not react at all. Just as he was about to give up, the jade talisman in his hand suddenly gave off a warm feeling. This meant that Shangguan Li was within 50 kilometers of him. Li Mu followed the direction of the life talisman and found this place. Li Mu frowned slightly as he gazed at the forest filled with poisonous miasma up ahead. Stepping into the forest meant stepping into the territory of Yingzhou. Yingzhou was different from Zhou continent. Since ancient times, it had been a barren land. The poisonous miasma was not suitable for humans to live in. It was not beneficial to cultivators either. Apart from some poisonous insects and demons, regular demons were unwilling to enter this place. The people of Yunzhong Commandery called the ancient mountain forest. The demons born in this place would be nourished by the poisonous miasma from birth. Their intelligence would be eroded, making them more dangerous than regular demons. They would occasionally run out and cause trouble for the people of Yunzhong Commandery. No wonder there was no news from Shangguan Li. The terrain here was complicated, and the mountains were stacked on top of each other. Mr. Mei did not receive Shangguan Li's message, most likely because the signal was not good. Shangguan Li was not far ahead. Li Mu did not hesitate too much and quickly flew into the forest. At the same time, deep in the forest in a valley, Shangguan Li raised her head and looked up. The canopy of the ancient trees above her covered the sky and the sun. They had been trapped here for 3 days. Along the way, Cui Ming had almost been caught several times, but he had managed to escape. Later on, they were trapped here by Cui Ming's scheme. Someone had set up a huge formation in this valley. This formation was extremely powerful. Entering the formation was very easy, but exiting it was harder than ascending to the heavens. With the few of them working together and the Dharma treasure that His Majesty had bestowed upon her, they could even put up a fight against a powerhouse in the early stage of the 6th realm. However, they could not break this formation from the inside. Not only that, this formation also blocked her from sending messages, causing her to completely lose contact with the fairy's capital. In the past few days, Cui Ming and the person who set up the formation did not do anything to them. They only trapped them. It was likely that they wanted to wait for their magic power to be depleted, so that they could get rid of them effortlessly. A middle-aged woman walked over and shook her head. It still won't work. They probably want to trap us to death, or use us as bait to kill more powerhouses from the imperial court. The fact that Cui Ming was a spy from the demon sect had already caused the imperial court to lose a lot of face. If he set up the imperial court again, and caused the imperial court to lose even more powerhouses, not only would it cause the imperial court to lose even more prestige, it would also fuel the demon sect's arrogance. Shangguan Li took out a piece of spiritual jade and held it in her hand. As she recovered her magic power, she said in a low voice, "I just hope that no one else will come." Outside the valley, on top of a mountain, Cui Ming stood with his hands behind his back. The man wearing a black pearl crown glanced at him and asked, "Why don't you just kill them?" Cui Ming said calmly, "It would be too much of a pity to kill them. Shangguan Li is the Empress' personal female official. Keeping her alive is more valuable than killing her. Moreover, Only by keeping them alive can the imperial court send even more powerful powerhouses. When that time comes, we can take their souls and absorb their cultivation. Wouldn't the two of us be able to advance further? You people from the Maison sect are really sinister and vicious. The man glanced at him and asked, "Aren't you afraid that you'll attract the most powerful powerhouses? When that time comes, the formation won't be able to trap them, and both of us will die." Cui Ming smiled and said, "Don't worry. I know the imperial court better than the Maison sect. The number of powerhouses at the peak of the sixth realm in the imperial court can be counted on one hand. They can't come here. At most, they can only send the beginner sixth realm. You spent so much time to set up such a formation. It's not just to trap a few fifth realm powerhouses, right?" The black-robed man glanced at him and said, "I'll say this first. Whether it's these people or those who come later, I don't want any of their dharma treasures. However, I want all of their soul energy." Cui Ming didn't think much and nodded. "I promise you." After the two of them reached an agreement, the black-robed man fell silent for a moment and asked again, "You've been hiding in the Great Zhou court for so long. You must know a lot of secrets. About half a year ago, Chu Jiang of Gojouzian died. Do you know what happened?" Cui Ming shook his head and said, "This is a top secret in the imperial court. Other than the officials in the North County, I'm afraid only a few people in the imperial court know about it. Why? Is there a problem with Chu Jiang of Gojouzian's death?" The black-robed man said in a low voice, "His cultivation is slightly higher than mine. He hid in the North County for 5 years to use the 18 Hell formation and sacrifice hundreds of thousands of people in the county city to reach the sixth realm. Once the 18 Hell formation is set up, it can trap Dongxian to death. Only transcendence can break it. According to what I know, he clearly set up the 18 Hell formation that night, but he still failed in the end." Cui Ming looked at the valley below and asked, "How is this formation compared to the 18 Hell formation?" There was a hint of pride in the black-robed man's voice. He said slowly, "Although I don't have 18 ghost generals under my command, this valley is a wonderful place to gather in. With a little use of the surrounding terrain, I can borrow the power of heaven and earth to set up this formation. Even a sixth realm expert would find it difficult to escape. It's only stronger than the 18 Hell formation, not weaker." Cui Ming smiled and said, "Then there's no need to worry. If you can refine the souls of these people, I'm sure His Highness Emperor Song will be able to become the head of the 10 kings of hell, right?" The black-robed man didn't speak again, but he snorted coldly in his heart. His cultivation was already at the peak of the spectral soul realm. He wasn't inferior to Chu Jiang of Gojouzian at that time. If the Great Zhou court sent another sixth realm expert, then with the help of that person's soul power, and these people in the battlefield, he had a glimmer of hope to take another step forward. At that time he wouldn't even have to bow down to the Nether Saint. When Emperor Song thought of this, he couldn't help but smile. But in the next moment, his eyes moved slightly, and he said, "Hide your aura first. Someone is coming." Li Mu held Shangguan Li's life talisman in his hand as he flew all the way here. Dangers lurked everywhere in this desolate mountain forest. Even cultivators couldn't inhale too much of the poisonous fog and miasma in the forest. He didn't know how many poisonous insects and ferocious beasts he encountered along the way. These insects and beasts were nourished by the miasma, so it was very difficult for them to develop basic spiritual intelligence. But their strength couldn't be underestimated. It was impossible to guard against them, and they greatly delayed his search for Shangguan Li. Li Mu flew in the air in the forest. The life talisman in his hand became hotter and hotter. This meant that the distance between him and Shangguan Li was getting closer and closer. When he flew to a certain valley, the life talisman in his hand was already burning hot. This meant that Shangguan Li was near him. In the valley, Shangguan Li looked at Li Mu, who was floating in the air. Her expression changed, and she warned loudly, "Don't come over." Li Mu heard the voice and flew into the valley. Looking at Shangguan Li, who was not far ahead, he asked, "What did you just say?" As soon as he finished speaking, he noticed something unusual and looked around. Looking down from the valley, there seemed to be nothing unusual here. But after landing in the valley, Li Mu immediately noticed that something was wrong. There was no trace of heaven and earth spiritual qi here. There seemed to be a large formation around, blocking the heaven and earth spiritual qi outside. Li Mu flew out but encountered an invisible barrier. He was trapped in a formation. Shangguanli covered her face with both hands. After a long time, she asked with a sullen expression, "How did you find this place? Is there anyone else?" Li Mu waved the life talisman in his hand and threw it to Shangguanli. "There's no one else. Sister Mei couldn't contact you. Coincidentally, I went back to the North County for a vacation, so I asked His Majesty for your life talisman, and also looked for you. What's with this formation?" Shangguanli's expression turned ugly. "We fell into Cui Ming's trap and are trapped here." She glanced at Li Mu and said, "I didn't expect that I would die with you." Li Mu also glanced at her and shook his head. "You may want to die, but I don't want to die." He took out the spiritual snail and activated it with his mana. He tried to contact the Empress, but there was no response. It seemed that this formation was the reason why Shangguanli could not send messages. Shangguanli walked over and said, "We've been attacking this formation for 3 days, but there was no result. This formation can trap a 6th realm cultivator. Cui Ming used this to attract the strong cultivators of the imperial court. I didn't expect that the person who came was you." Her words made Li Mu very uncomfortable. It was as if he was here to die for nothing. It was not like he had never seen a formation that could trap a 6th realm cultivator to death. The last person, Chu Jiang of Gojoseon, also set up a similar formation. Grass should have grown on his grave by now. Li Mu might not have the ability to set up such a formation. However, he had never been afraid of anyone who wanted him to destroy it. The formation was not the main point. Li Mu looked at Shangguanli and asked, "Where's Cui Ming?" As Li Mu's voice fell, a burst of laughter suddenly came from outside the formation. Cui Ming floated outside the formation, his face full of surprise. "Li Mu, it's actually you." Li Mu could tell that Cui Ming was very happy. Moreover, it was a joy that came from the bottom of his heart. There was not even a hint of hatred on his face. However, this was precisely the expression of hatred that was the deepest. Li Mu made him lose his reputation and his official position. He made him a 4th-rank official and the son-in-law of a dynasty. In just a few days, he became a wanted criminal. He made him work so hard for 20 years, but in a single night he was liberated. If Li Mu were in Cui Ming's shoes, he would also hate him. When hatred reached the extreme, it would also turn into joy. Of course, he was not happy because he was reunited with Li Mu after a long separation. He was happy because Li Mu had fallen into his hands. The black-robed man floated beside Cui Ming and asked, "He's Li Mu? The Li Mu who caused you to end up like this?" The smile on Cui Ming's face gradually disappeared. He looked at Li Mu with endless hatred and said, "When the time comes, don't kill him directly. I want him to suffer all kinds of torture in this world. Only then can I vent the hatred in my heart." He was just a 4th-level cultivator. Emperor Song did not take him seriously at all. He said, "Do as you wish." Cui Ming floated in the air and sneered. "Li Mu, oh Li Mu. You didn't think that you would fall into my hands so soon, did you?" Li Mu looked up at him and said disdainfully, "You're not the son-in-law anymore, and you still call yourself this prince. The princess residence has now taken someone else's surname. There's a new son-in-law who calls himself this prince. He lives in your house and sleeps with your wife. Fortunately, you two don't have children. Otherwise he would beat your children." Cui Ming's face became extremely gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "That bastard." Shangguanli asked in a low voice, "Are you telling the truth?" Li Mu said in a low voice, "I'm going to die anyway. Can't I just disgust him a little before I die?" Cui Ming seemed to be really disgusted. His face darkened, and he left without saying a word. He did not even mock Li Mu anymore. Shangguanli also did not say anything. She sat on a tree stump and stared blankly ahead. No one knew what she was thinking. Li Mu sat beside her and asked, "Are you afraid of dying?" Shangguanli moved her butt to the side and said indifferently, "What's there to be afraid of dying? I just don't want Her Majesty to be sad." Li Mu tilted his head and looked at her. He found that when she said this, her expression was very calm. It seemed that she really was not afraid. This made him look at Shangguan Li in a new light. She was about to die, but she was still thinking about whether others would be sad. She truly loved the Empress. If it were Li Mu, he would definitely not be able to do this. After a moment of silence, Shangguan Li took out a piece of fulu from her sleeve and handed it to Li Mu. Li Mu looked at her and asked, "What are you doing?" Shangguan Li said expressionlessly, "This is a heaven-grade fulu. It can allow you to teleport hundreds of miles away. In a while, we will do our best to break this formation. You can immediately use this talisman to escape to the county city of Yunzhong County." Li Mu asked, "If you can break the formation, why don't you use it yourselves?" Shangguan Li said indifferently, "If we explode our primordial spirits together, we can attack the weak points of this formation. We can break a hole in this formation. You can take the opportunity to escape." The cultivation of Taoism cultivators was based on their primordial spirits. If their physical bodies died, their primordial spirits would not be destroyed and could be reborn. If their primordial spirits exploded, their souls would truly be destroyed. Li Mu never thought that Shangguan Li would give her only chance to live to him. She had always disliked him. Li Mu looked at her and asked, "Why?" Shangguan Li looked into the distance and said, "Her Majesty can do without us, but she can't do without you." At this moment, Li Mu suddenly felt some admiration for Shangguan Li. Although he did not like her much in the past, of course, he coveted her position more. He wanted to replace her and become the Empress' closest vassal. But now it seemed that in some matters, he would never be able to compare to Shangguan Li. Not only could she give her life for the Empress, she could even give her life for her love rival, her political rival, who often competed with her for favor. It was enough to show her unadulterated loyalty to the Empress. Shangguan Li finally looked at Li Mu and said, "If you can escape, I hope you can wholeheartedly assist Her Majesty in governing the Great Zhou so that Her Majesty can escape from that cage as soon as possible." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "You make it sound so serious. Isn't it just a broken formation? It's not a big deal." Chapter 316. Author's note. I didn't expect it to rain at night. I couldn't get a taxi home after dinner, and it took too long to walk back, delaying my writing. In the end, I decided to pay a higher price and hailed a Mercedes-Benz. It's so expensive. If I don't write at least one chapter, I'll feel sorry for myself. I have to write more in the future to earn more money. Before coming to Yunzhong County, Li Mu didn't think that Shangguan Li and the others would be trapped by Cui Ming. With her strength, it was enough to deal with Cui Ming alone, not to mention that she had these internal guard experts by her side. He only wanted to check on her situation on the way back to the North region, and then report to the Empress. He didn't expect that with so many people, they would still be defeated by Cui Ming. If they knew the result, the imperial court would definitely send Sixth Realm experts. Shangguan Li looked at Li Mu calmly. The array he mentioned had already trapped the 5 of them for 4 whole days. If it were any other time, Shangguan Li would inevitably scold Li Mu. However, at this moment, she didn't have the mood to scold Li Mu for his lack of knowledge. She said, "Attacking this array will backfire. Don't force yourself. Save your mana and try your best to escape later." Li Mu looked at her and asked, "Are you really willing to die for me?" Shangguan Li said calmly, "Not for you, but for Her Majesty." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "It's the same." He patted Shangguan Li's shoulder and said, "Don't worry, you won't die. I promised Her Majesty to bring you back safe and sound. If I go back alone, I won't have the face to see Her Majesty." "You're still saying this at a time like this. Ugh." Shangguan Li just opened her mouth when Li Mu covered it. Li Mu raised his head to take a look and said, "I happen to know of this formation. Although this formation is powerful, it's not like there's no way to break it. Including you, there are 5 5th-level cultivators here. That's enough." Shangguan Li took away Li Mu's hand and didn't care about his rude behavior just now. She quickly asked, "Is what you said true?" What Li Mu said was naturally true. The Tao of array formations came from ancient inheritances. Apart from the almighty of the Spirit Array sect, who could innovate from time to time, it was impossible for a kid from the demon sect to create a new array formation. There were only a few powerful formations in the demon sect. The 10 Ghosts God Trapping Formation, the 18 Prison Formation, and the Immortal Trapping Formation here. The power of this formation was about the same as the Great Formation of the 18 Hells. However, the person who set up this Immortal Trapping Formation knew how to make use of the surrounding terrain to borrow a portion of the power of heaven and earth. This made the power of this formation even more powerful than the Great Formation of the 18 Hells set up by Chu Jiang of Gojoseon. However, as long as it was an array formation, no matter how powerful it would have flaws. There was no perfect array formation in the world. This was something that every cultivator who studied array formations had to understand before they started learning array formations. Li Mu had once thought that meeting Thousand Illusions Shangren was his greatest calamity. Later, he increasingly realized that Thousand Illusions Shangren was actually the greatest gift that heaven had given him. He had obtained the experience and knowledge of a peak 6th realm heretical cultivation for free. Although these things were useless in most cases, and Li Mu was a righteous path cultivator and couldn't use evil path techniques, there would always be times when he could use them. For example, now. He observed for a while, picked up a branch, and drew 5 circles on the ground in different positions. Then he said to Shangguan Li and the other 4, "You guys stand in these positions." Shangguan Li was still in disbelief. She asked, "You really know array formations?" Li Mu replied, "A little." Shangguan Li looked into Li Mu's eyes. After a while, she slowly walked into a circle. In the past few days, they had tried everything, but they couldn't make the array formation shake at all. She didn't believe that Li Mu had a way to break the array formation. But at this moment, they had no other choice. They could only try Li Mu's method. It would only be possible if they tried. Sitting here was just waiting for death. Even though she was already prepared to die, she wasn't willing to give up any chance of survival. The other 4 inner guard experts also knew this. They each chose a circle and stood in it. Outside the array formation, Cui Ming had already noticed their strange behavior. He asked Emperor Song, "What are they trying to do?" Emperor Song looked down and said, "It's just a last-ditch struggle. Don't worry about them. Do you think the Great Zhou Court will send people to save them?" Cui Ming twitched the corner of his mouth and said, "If it was just Shangguan Li alone, I wouldn't be so sure. But with that Li Mu, the court will definitely send people. Don't worry." Emperor Song said in surprise, "Are you so sure?" Cui Ming said coldly, "This Li Mu is the Empress' only favorite official. She definitely won't let him die." "Favorite official?" Emperor Song's expression changed. He asked, "Do you think the Empress of the Great Zhou will come personally for him?" Cui Ming looked at him and comforted him. "Don't worry. What kind of status does the Empress have? How could she come personally? He is the Empress' favorite official, not her favorite concubine." Emperor Song looked at the young man trapped in the array formation and said, "Not necessarily. This person is so handsome." Cui Ming shook his head and said, "That's even more impossible. When I was luring these people here, I received a message from the Meizong sect's secret agent in Chengdu. This Li Mu is still a fledgling." Emperor Song was relieved and said, "That's good. The Empress of the Great Zhou had the cultivation of the 7th realm. If she really came here, not to mention Emperor Song, even if the remaining Yama kings of the 9 halls and the Nether Saint gathered together, they would all die here. From then on, only 9 of the 10 demonic sects were left. The Soul sect would be completely wiped out." Cui Ming said, "Don't worry, Empress. As long as your array formation is fine, just wait for the fish to take the bait." Emperor Song said, "Don't worry. I learned this array formation from Lord Qianhuan." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a sudden tremor under their feet. Emperor Song said in surprise, "Is it the Earth Dragon turning over?" Cui Ming looked at the array formation and said in shock, "It seems to be your array formation." Emperor Song quickly looked at the array formation and found that the originally stable array formation had begun to tremble slightly. Several people in the array formation were standing in different positions and attacking the array formation. Emperor Song's expression changed slightly, but he still said calmly, "Don't worry. This level of tremor can't shake the array formation." In the next moment, the array formation trembled even more violently. Cui Ming asked in horror, "Is it really fine?" Emperor Song took a deep breath and said, "It's fine. It's not a big problem." In the array formation, the way Shangguan Li and the others looked at Li Mu had completely changed. In the past few days, the 5 of them had joined forces and attacked with all their strength, but they couldn't shake the array formation at all. Instead, they suffered a lot of backlash. At this moment, after hearing Li Mu's words, they could shake the array formation to this extent just by changing their positions and using 50% of their mana. If they attacked with all their strength, it was not impossible to break the array formation. Thinking of this, the 5 of them were no longer distracted. They immediately urged their mana and attacked the array formation with all their strength. Under the fierce attacks of the 5 people, the array formation trembled even more violently, as if it would collapse in the next moment. Emperor Song finally couldn't keep calm and said quickly, "Stabilize the array formation with me." He and Cui Ming flew above the array formation and channeled all their mana into the array formation. The trembling of the array formation finally calmed down a little. 5 people on the inside and 2 people on the outside. They formed a kind of balance and entered into a stalemate. At this moment, Li Mu, who was in the array formation, flashed a green light in his hand and the Qing Xian sword appeared. He urged the Qing Xian sword and slashed at the array formation with all his might. The balance between the 2 sides was broken, and the array formation started to tremble violently again. Emperor Song and Cui Ming tried their best to stabilize the array formation, but they still couldn't stabilize it. At this crucial moment, Cui Ming looked down and shouted, "What are you waiting for? Attack!" As soon as he said this, one of the inner guards attacking the array formation suddenly changed the direction of his attack. He attacked with all his might and landed on another inner guard in front of him. Puff! The middle-aged woman was suddenly attacked by her companion. Her body flew out horizontally and blood spurted out. Her breath instantly weakened and her body landed heavily on the ground. She pointed at the person behind her and said in disbelief, "You!" The woman sneered and flew up. Under the control of Emperor Song, a gap appeared in the array formation. She flew out of the gap and the gap quickly closed. Without the attacks of the 5 people, the array formation immediately stabilized. The woman's body floated in the air and stood side by side with Emperor Song and Cui Ming. She looked down at everyone from above. Although she didn't say anything, the truth was obvious. Shangguan Li looked at her. At this moment, she thought about how Cui Ming was always able to escape before them all the way here. She was also the one who intentionally led them here. Shangguan Li realized something and gritted her teeth. "So it's you." The woman smiled and said, "Commander Shangguan, you realized it a little too late." There was a spy from the demon sect among the inner guards. One of the inner guards was severely injured by her sneak attack and could no longer use his strength. Only 3 of the original 5 Fifth Realm cultivators were left. The hope that had just been ignited in their hearts was extinguished just like that. At this moment, even if the 3 of them self-destructed their primordial spirits, they still wouldn't be able to break the array formation. Li Mu walked to the injured inner guard and asked, "How are you?" "I won't die." The middle-aged woman struggled to stand up and asked Li Mu, "Can the 3 of us break this array formation?" What she meant was that she no longer had the power to break the array formation. Li Mu shook his head and said, "Under normal circumstances, at least 5 Fifth Realm cultivators are needed to break this array formation." Shangguan Li was a little disappointed. She looked at Li Mu and said, "It looks like we still have to die together." Li Mu also sighed and said, "Plan A has failed. We can only carry out Plan B." Shangguan Li was stunned and asked, "What Plan B?" Li Mu said, "Under normal circumstances, 5 Fifth Realm cultivators are needed to break this array formation. Under abnormal circumstances, I alone will be enough." Li Mu didn't want to do it himself when there were other ways. That was a method that would kill 1,000 enemies, but cost 800 of his own men. He didn't want to use it unless he had no other choice. However, he had no other choice now. He looked at Shangguan Li and said, "Commander Shangguan Li, can you do me a favor?" Shangguan Li adjusted her transcendence energy to its peak and said seriously, What do you need me to do? Li Mu stretched out his hand and said, Can you support me a little? Shang Guanli looked at him blankly. Just a moment ago, she was already prepared to die. This contrast stunned her for a moment. However, she quickly regained her senses and supported Li Mu. She asked, and then? Li Mu said, You just need to support me. He took a deep breath and formed a seal with one hand in his sleeve. He looked up at the sky. Outside the array formation, Cui Ming and the woman suddenly felt their hair stand on end. An extreme fear arose in their hearts. Emperor Song's expression changed drastically. He grabbed the two of them by the shoulders and shouted, Retreat! The three figures flashed and instantly disappeared on the spot. Crack! The moment they retreated, something in the surroundings seemed to shatter. Puff! Li Mu spat out a mouthful of blood, and his aura instantly weakened. Shang Guanli hurriedly supported him and asked with concern, Are you okay? Li Mu touched the corner of his mouth and said, I'm fine. The sturdiness of this formation was even greater than that of the 18 Hell formation. The power of the heavens and earth that had been surging into his body had been weakened even more. His strength had also made a qualitative leap compared to a few months ago. He had only suffered some minor injuries. Li Mu took out a few healing pills and threw them into his mouth. Shang Guanli and the others looked up at the sky with dazed expressions. Although they didn't know what just happened, the array formation that trapped them for 4 days above their heads disappeared just like that. Chapter 317. Seeing that the formation was broken, Cui Ming's face was filled with fear. Her voice was hoarse as she asked, Is this what you meant by no problem? How is this possible? Emperor Song's face was also filled with disbelief. The immortal trapping formation that he set up was even stronger than Chu Jiang of Gojoseon's 18 hellish formation. How could it be broken so easily? Even if it was unbelievable, the truth was right in front of his eyes. After Shang Guanli and the other two regained their senses, they immediately flew up. Their eyes were filled with murderous intent as they looked at the three figures in front of them. Out of the 4 internal guards, 1 betrayed them, 1 was severely injured, and only 2 were left. The severely injured woman no longer had the ability to fight. Including Shang Guanli, there were 3 people on both sides. There was no need for words. In an instant, the 6 of them unleashed their powers and magic treasures and quickly engaged in battle. Although Emperor Song was at the 5th realm, he was clearly a powerful cultivator at the peak of the 5th realm. Shang Guanli and the other internal guard attacked with all their might. Even with the advantage of Fulu's magic treasures, they were still suppressed by him. The other inner guard was entangled by the Devil Sect's spy, and was unable to extricate himself. In this way, no one could take care of Cui Ming. Cui Ming looked at Li Mu with eyes full of hatred. She said sinisterly, It's all because of you that I am today. This day next year will be the anniversary of your death. Li Mu said calmly, Don't accuse me. You are today only because you are a beast. Cui Ming did not waste any more words with Li Mu. She formed a seal with her fingers and the air around them cracked. A few invisible wind blades flew towards Li Mu. The wind blades were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they were beside Li Mu. Clang! Just as they were about to hit Li Mu, a golden armor suddenly appeared around Li Mu's body. The wind blades hit the golden armor and made a crisp sound. Li Mu stood in his original position and did not move. Golden armor talisman. Cui Ming's expression was ugly. Although the golden armor talisman was only earth rank, his cultivation was only in the creation realm. With his early-stage creation realm strength, it would take a lot of effort to break the golden armor talisman. Just as he was about to make a move, Li Mu moved faster than him. A white light flashed in his hand, and a stack of Fulu appeared in his hand. Without thinking, he threw them all out. Rumble. Above Cui Ming's head, dark clouds gathered and purple thunderbolts flashed continuously. Cui Ming dodged a few purple heavenly thunderbolts in a sorry state. Suddenly, he felt a chill on his back and his hair stood on end. A golden sword talisman was thrusting towards his back. Clang! Cui Ming held a bronze mirror in his hand to protect his vitals. When the sword talisman hit the bronze mirror, it immediately shattered. Cui Ming's body was also sent flying several feet. Before he could come back to his senses, he suddenly felt a chill rising from below, as if it was going to freeze his primordial spirit. When he bent down to take a look, he realized that his feet had already been frozen, and the layer of ice was still spreading upwards. Under the layer of ice, there was a fulu that emitted a bone-chilling coldness. Cui Ming slapped his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. When the blood landed on the layer of ice quickly melted. Cui Ming flew up and broke free from the layer of ice. In the next moment he felt a burning sensation above his head. Cui Ming looked up and saw a fulu burning and turning into a fire dragon. The fire dragon swung its tail and coiled around him. Before the first wave subsided, another wave rose. Cui Ming was chased by the fire dragon, and he was still extremely depressed. Exactly how many high-grade talismans does this Li Mu possess? He's a 5th level expert, yet he was actually forced to only be on the defensive by Li Mu, who's a level lower than him. And he didn't have the slightest ability to retaliate, after using his mystique with great difficulty to kill the fire dragon. Another small golden sword pierced towards him from the front. Cui Ming swung his sword at the sword talisman with all his might. He did not notice that a small paper man had already flown behind him. The paper man stuck to Cui Ming's body. Cui Ming maintained his sword-swinging posture, and was rooted to the spot. Whoosh! The small golden sword was extremely fast, and was aimed at his forehead. At this moment, Cui Ming was unable to use his dermic powers. If he was pierced by the sword talisman, his primordial spirit might be able to escape, but his physical body would definitely perish. Bang! Seeing that Cui Ming was in trouble, Emperor Song abandoned Shangguan Li and the expert inner guard and rushed over. He kicked Cui Ming away and used one hand to grab the sword talisman. Black fog spread out from his hand, and the sword talisman struggled and buzzed a few times before dimming and completely collapsing. Emperor Song waved his hand, and the immobilization talisman on Cui Ming's body burned. He looked at Cui Ming and said, "You were actually forced into this state by a 4th level junior. Could it be that you only know how to enjoy yourself these years in the Immortal's capital, and neglected your cultivation?" Cui Ming's face darkened. He said, "This person has countless treasures on him. You can try and see how difficult it is to deal with him." "Then I'll deal with him first," Emperor Song said lightly. His hands moved quickly and formed a huge ghost seal in the air. This ghost seal was 10 feet square. After it was formed, it smashed towards Li Mu's head with the speed of lightning. Li Mu still stood where he was. As the ghost seal descended, the golden armor on his body shattered. Just as the ghost seal was about to land on his body, Li Mu's body emitted a white light again. When the white light touched the ghost seal stopped in midair, unable to land, and finally collapsed. Emperor Song's eyes were filled with shock. He blurted out, "An upper-grade heaven-class protective Dharma treasure." At this moment he was cursing in his heart. Just how much did the Empress of the Great Zhou pamper Li Mu? An upper-grade heaven-class protective Dharma treasure was even more precious than Fulu and elixirs of the same level. It was also a rare item even for a 6th-level cultivator. Yet, it was worn by a 4th-level cultivator. Even a 6th-level cultivator would need to attack with all his might to break through the defense of this Dharma treasure. Normal attacks below the 6th level were no different from scratching an itch to him. Shangguan Li saw that Emperor Song also had his eyes on Li Mu, and was about to come over with the internal guard. Li Mu waved his hand at them and said, "You guys go deal with that spy first. Leave Cui Ming and this ghost to me." Shangguan Li saw the white light on Li Mu's body and knew that the Empress must have given him an even more powerful Dharma treasure. Emperor Song and Cui Ming couldn't do anything to him for a while, so she wasn't worried anymore. She said to the middle-aged woman beside her, "Clean up the sect first, then help him." Emperor Song also looked at Li Mu and said to Cui Ming in a low voice, "You and I work together to deal with this person. This Dharma treasure requires mana to activate, and he's only a 4th-level cultivator. Let's see how long he can last." An upper-grade heaven-class Dharma treasure drained a lot of mana. This was because it was originally designed for 6th-level cultivators. Dongxian cultivators could use it continuously for 2 hours, but a divine tier cultivator might not even be able to last for half an hour. In a situation where the outside world was constantly attacking, the duration would be even shorter. Li Mu's mind moved, and a pile of spiritual jades appeared at his feet. As he absorbed the spiritual energy in the spiritual jades, he used the swordsman formula to recover his mana using the power of heaven and earth around him. Only then did he manage to achieve a dynamic balance with the speed at which the Dharma treasure was draining his mana. Emperor Song and Cui Ming attacked Li Mu from afar, and their faces gradually showed signs of doubt. They originally thought that Li Mu would last for a while at most, but now that half an hour had passed, he still seemed to be in good spirits and did not look like he had overdrawn his mana at all. On the other hand, the two of them were the ones who were draining their mana continuously. If this continued, they might be the first to run out of mana. Emperor Song attacked a few more times, and finally gave up. He said, "This person is strange. Spells and divine powers are useless against him. Let's get close and take his life." He stretched out his hands, and two ghostly long blades appeared in his hands. Cui Ming took out a folding fan from his waist. The two of them stopped attacking Li Mu from afar, and flew towards him. In a situation where the difference in mana was not too great, Li Mu was not afraid of anyone in close-range combat. However, regardless of whether it was Cui Ming or Emperor Song, their mana was far superior to his. In the face of absolute power, any technique was meaningless. If the examiners of the Ministry of War did not suppress their abilities to the 4th level, no matter how skilled Li Mu was in martial arts, he would not be a match for them in the combat examination. Emperor Song and Cui Ming, these two shameless people, one in the Destiny realm and the other in the peak of the Spectral Spirit realm, teamed up to bully him, who was at the 4th level. No matter how powerful Li Mu's divine powers and Dao techniques were, his cultivation was too low, and he would not be able to defeat the two of them together. Fortunately, ever since Lu Hanyan became Yu Zhenzi's disciple, ever since he hugged the Empress' thigh, divine powers and Dao techniques were no longer his trump cards. Li Mu flipped his hand, and two Fulu cards appeared in his hand. He threw the Fulu out, and a golden light flashed on the Fulu. The two Fulu cards turned into two armored soldiers about 10 feet tall. The two armored soldiers held long halberds, and their bodies emitted 5th-level aura. These two golden armor soldier talismans were bestowed to him by the Empress. Although they were also at the heavenly level, they could not be compared to the one Li Mu obtained from Fulu School. Only a handful of talisman Dao experts in Fulu School could create 6th-level golden armor soldier talismans. However, Cui Ming and Emperor Song were only at the 5th level, and there was no need to use that trump card. The two golden armor soldier talismans were controlled by Li Mu, and they were telepathically connected to Li Mu. After they appeared, they went straight for Cui Ming and Emperor Song. What talisman is this? How many Fulu cards does he have? The two golden armor soldier talismans completely entangled Cui Ming and Emperor Song. Cui Ming was weaker and was quickly suppressed by the golden armor soldier. Emperor Song dealt with one golden armor soldier with ease. Li Mu simply let the two golden armor soldiers work together to deal with Emperor Song, and he threw out another stack of Fulu cards at Cui Ming. Cui Ming held a fan-shaped weapon in his hand and dealt with it in a pathetic manner. He had cultivated for many years, and he had never been so frustrated in a battle. This was not a battle at all, but a competition to see who was richer. He glared at Li Mu and said coldly, "Do you think you are the only one with Fulu?" He took out a Fulu card from his chest. His face showed a pained expression, but he still activated it without hesitation. The power of heaven and earth above Li Mu's head rippled, and a huge golden palm print appeared from the void and pressed down on him. This Fulu card was obviously not an ordinary item. The power of heaven and earth contained in this palm print was comparable to a normal attack from a 6th realm cultivator. Li Mu's armor artifact could withstand a 6th realm cultivator's attack, but it was not unlimited. In fact, the armor artifact could help him weaken the attack, but he still had to bear a portion of it himself. The armor artifact would also be damaged after taking several hits from a Dongxian cultivator. Even with the armor artifact, Li Mu could not avoid being injured after taking this hit. He did not even think and threw out a few more Fulu cards. Light and shadow overlapped above Li Mu's head. A golden armor, a green shield, a tortoise shell, and a bell shadow protected him firmly. When the palm print pressed down, the golden armor was the first to crumble. The green shield lasted for a moment before crumbling as well. The tortoise shell and bell shadow were the last to crumble. After breaking through 4 barriers, the palm print was like an arrow at the end of its flight. It was easily neutralized by Li Mu's armor artifact. A few more Fulu cards appeared in Li Mu's hand. He looked at Cui Ming and said, "Do you have more?" Cui Ming's face was gloomy. He was not Li Mu. He did not have the Empress's favor, so he naturally did not have so many high-level Fulu cards. He no longer had any Fulu cards of that level. Even if he did, it would probably be wasted. Although he did not want to admit it, he had to admit that he could not do anything to Li Mu by himself. He could only hope that Emperor Song could destroy the 2 divine weapons, or exhaust their spiritual energy, so that they would dissipate on their own. Although the divine weapons were powerful, they would not exist for long. Cui Ming's mind wandered for a moment before he suddenly felt something tighten around his waist. He looked down and realized that a golden rope had wrapped around his waist. After being bound by the rope, Cui Ming's spiritual energy was immediately sealed. His body fell heavily from the sky. Li Mu walked slowly towards Cui Ming and kicked him heavily. He asked, "You still have time to be distracted when you are fighting others. Who are you looking down on?" Chapter 318. Before Lu Hanyan became Yuzhenzi's disciple, and before Li Mu clung to the Empress' thigh, he was very frugal with his fights of magical power. Not to mention that there was no Fulu at that time. Even if there was, Li Mu would not bear to use it. At that time he was carrying out missions, and getting injured was a common thing. Occasionally, he would even be seriously injured. But ever since Lu Hanyan entered Fulu school, and Li Mu became the Empress' close vassal, the situation completely changed. Fulu school naturally did not lack Fulu. Li Mu could not even imagine how rich the Empress' treasury was. Now he had the capital to be extravagant. If he was poor, he would use his tactics, and if he was rich, he would use his firepower to cover. In any case, if he ran out of Fulu, Lu Hanyan would give it to him. If his transcendent artifact was broken, the Empress would replace it for him. Li Mu was the woman behind Lu Hanyan, and the Empress was the woman behind him. With his own woman, there was no need to be polite. Cui Ming was tightly bound by the immortal binding chains, and his transcendence energy was restricted. When he heard Li Mu's words, he almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. Fight of magical power? That damned Li Mu. He called throwing Fulu and launching a transcendent artifact sneak attack a fight of magical power? From beginning to end, had he ever used any magical power? On the other side, Emperor Song was entangled by 2 golden armored soldiers. Although these 2 soldiers did not pose too much of a threat to him, they kept him firmly pinned down, preventing him from helping Cui Ming. Seeing Cui Ming captured so quickly, Emperor Song secretly cursed Cui Ming's incompetence. He was actually captured alive by a cultivator 1 level lower than him, but he could not watch him die without doing anything. With a low roar, his body turned into a cloud of ghost fog, enveloping the 2 golden armored soldiers. Golden light shone brightly in the black fog, and soon, Li Mu lost contact with the 2 golden armored soldiers. The black fog reformed into Emperor Song again, but his aura was now much weaker than before. It was not easy for him to defeat the 2 soldiers. After dealing with the 2 soldiers, Emperor Song rushed straight towards Li Mu. Li Mu casually threw out 2 Fulu, which turned into 2 golden armored soldiers, blocking Emperor Song's figure. Emperor Song was already a little stunned. Such a precious Fulu, ordinary cultivators would carefully keep it as a life-saving trump card at a critical moment. However, such a precious Fulu was like an ordinary yellow paper in Li Mu's hands. He threw it away as he pleased. Even as an enemy, Emperor Song felt his heart ache when he saw this. Emperor Song was blocked by 2 more soldiers. Li Mu looked at Cui Ming on the ground, wondering if he should hand him over to the imperial court or kill him on the spot. Meizong had spent 20 years to help Cui Ming to the position of assistant minister of the secretariat. His position in Meizong must not be low, and he must know many secrets of the demon sect. It would be a waste to kill him just like that. Cui Ming's body was tied up, and he could not move. When he raised his head, he saw the murderous intent on Li Mu's face. A trace of ruthlessness appeared on his face. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of essence blood. His lips moved slightly, and no one knew what he was saying. The next moment, a white light flashed on his body, and his figure suddenly disappeared. The immortal binding lock fell to the ground, and Cui Ming's body reappeared 10 feet away. His face was as pale as paper, and his breath was extremely weak. At this moment, a scream came from Shangguan Li's direction. Under the siege of Shangguan Li and another expert internal guard, that demon sect spy's body was quickly destroyed. His primordial spirit was also captured and trapped in a magic treasure. Shangguan Li and the middle-aged woman flew over and said, "Kill Cui Ming and leave his primordial spirit behind." The two controlled their flying swords and attacked Cui Ming, while Li Mu stood aside and watched. Cui Ming had just escaped from the immortal binding lock with some kind of secret technique. He was already seriously injured, and was no match for the two of them. Cui Ming looked at the two and roared, "You forced me to do this." He suddenly opened the folding fan in his hand, took out 7 ribs, and quickly stabbed them into 7 parts of his body. Then he took out a piece of fulu and swallowed it. Whoosh! Whoosh! All of this happened very quickly. After Cui Ming did all this, Shangguan Li and the expert internal guard's flying swords were already in front of him. One sword was aimed at his chest, the other at his throat. When the two flying swords were only an inch away from Cui Ming's body, they both stopped. Cui Ming stretched out his hands and grabbed the two flying swords. The two flying swords struggled in his hands. Cui Ming clenched his fists, and the two flying swords directly shattered. Poof! Shangguan Li and the middle-aged woman were mentally connected to their magic treasures. When their magic treasures were destroyed, the two of them spat out a mouthful of blood. They stared at Cui Ming in shock. To be able to crush their magic treasures with his bare hands. What cultivation level was Cui Ming at now? Cui Ming threw the shattered flying swords on the ground and looked at them indifferently. His aura quickly climbed from early-stage creation realm to mid-stage creation realm, and then to peak creation realm. It did not stop until he broke through a certain barrier. A powerful pressure suddenly descended. Li Mu had felt this pressure from cultivators at the 6th level before. Emperor Song noticed the change in Cui Ming. After being stunned for a moment, he forced the 2 golden-armored soldiers back and said respectfully, "Emperor Song, one of the 10 kings of hell under the Nether Hell Saint, greets the Heavenly Lord." Cui Ming glanced at him. There was only indifference and disdain in his eyes. It was obvious that he did not take him seriously. Li Mu noticed that Emperor Song had addressed Cui Ming as Heavenly Lord. He carefully observed this person. As expected, although he still had Cui Ming's aura on him, his temperament and strength were poles apart from Cui Ming's. Cui Ming had obviously used the divine power of self-sacrifice to make a powerful cultivator of the demon sect descend from a distance. This powerful cultivator was at least at the 7th level. Only a 7th level cultivator could raise Cui Ming's strength so much from a distance. Li Mu had inherited the memories of the 1,000 Illusions venerable master, so he was not unfamiliar with the powerful cultivators of the demon sect. There was only one 7th level cultivator of the demon sect who had the title of Heavenly Lord. That was the great elder of the demon sect's Mirage sect, the Heavenly Lord of Myriad Illusions, who held a prominent position in the demon sect's 10 sects. This person's cultivation was at the 7th level, and his strength far surpassed that of the 1,000 Illusions venerable master. Of course, his actual body was very far away from here. This was only his avatar. Li Mu ordered the 2 golden-armored soldiers to give up on Emperor Song and go straight for Cui Ming. He wanted to test his strength first. Cui Ming, who was possessed by the Heavenly Lord of Myriad Illusions avatar, glanced indifferently at the 2 golden-armored soldiers. He reached out his right hand and clenched it lightly. The 2 golden-armored soldiers' bodies were restrained. They immediately collapsed and turned into specks of golden light. This was the difference between the 6th level and the 5th level. This difference was almost impossible to make up for. Shangguan Li's expression had already become very serious. After Cui Ming's aura soared to the 6th level, she knew that even though they had broken the array, they would not be able to escape today. She stuffed the fulu into Li Mu's hand and said, "We'll hold him back for a while. You take the opportunity to escape. Yunzhong County is no longer safe. Go to Baiyun Mountain as fast as you can." Li Mu asked, "Can you stop him?" Shang Guanli said in a low voice, "It's enough for you to activate this talisman and escape." Li Mu said helplessly, "Can you stop thinking about dying all the time?" Shang Guanli looked at Cui Ming and said, "His current strength has already reached the 6th level. If it weren't for that demon sex spy, we would still have hope. But now, if you don't leave, we can only die together." Li Mu said, "I still have a high-grade heaven tier fulu. It can summon a 6th-level gold-armored soldier." Shang Guanli was stunned for a moment and immediately said, "Then hurry up and take it out." Li Mu hesitated for a moment and said, "I can't bear to." This fulu was his final trump card. It was too wasteful to use it on Cui Ming. Li Mu did not believe that the 10,000 illusions god was really so powerful. Just a divine clone from a distance was enough to let Cui Ming cross a major realm. Even if he did look like a 6th level, he was definitely not as strong as a true 6th level. Shang Guanli looked at Li Mu. Her lips moved, but she suddenly did not know what to say. At this moment of life and death, he could not bear to part with a fulu. She really wanted to burrow into Li Mu's heart and see what he was thinking. Li Mu walked in front of Shang Guanli and said, "You two rest for a while first. I'll test him." Shang Guanli was at a loss. Cui Ming was already at the 6th level. No matter how powerful Li Mu's Dharma treasure was, it was still at the 4th level. The difference of 2 major realms could not be bridged, however. In the next moment, she realized that Li Mu's aura was also continuing to rise. Early stage divine power, mid-stage divine power, peak stage divine power, early stage creation realm, mid-stage creation realm. His aura finally stabilized at the mid-stage creation realm. It was even stronger than Shang Guanli's. Shang Guanli looked at Li Mu in a daze. At this moment, there seemed to be an illusion overlapping on his body. It was the illusion of a woman. Li Mu formed a seal with his hands and chanted in his heart. "Heaven and earth are limitless. Borrow the power of the universe. The power is born from the heart and grows endlessly. Heavenly Lord Tai, as the law commands." The Qingxian sword turned into thousands of sword shadows and slashed toward Cui Ming. Cui Ming raised his hands and a golden light shield appeared around his body. The sword shadows fell on the light shield and shattered. When the last sword light fell, the light shield was also full of cracks and shattered. Li Mu's hand seals changed again and he chanted, "Heaven and earth are limitless. Receive the order of the wind and thunder. The dragon fights in the wild, destroy all. Heavenly Lord Tai, as the law commands." When the last word command fell, wind and thunder suddenly erupted around Cui Ming. Green squall and purple lightning wrapped around Cui Ming's body. Emperor Song retreated. The lightning made one's scalp tingle. The green squall seemed to be able to suppress the soul and primordial spirit. Just by getting closer, his primordial spirit felt like it was going to be blown away. He looked at Li Mu with a terrified gaze. It was no wonder that Cui Ming would fall into this person's hands. He looked like he was only at the 4th realm, but whether it was his Fulu Dharma treasure or his Abhijna Dao technique, they were all incredible. Even if a strong person at the peak of the 5th realm encountered him, they would not be at an advantage. After a while, the wind and thunder dissipated. Cui Ming's clothes were tattered and his hair was disheveled. His body was charred and his aura was much weaker than before. He looked at Li Mu with a murderous gaze and said eerily, "You've had enough fun. It's my turn now, right?" In the blink of an eye, he pointed a finger at Li Mu. Li Mu's expression flickered as he said, "That's right." In the void, the power of heaven and earth vibrated violently. A huge finger quickly formed and pointed at Li Mu and Shang Guanli. The finger landed heavily, bringing with it a strong pressure. Li Mu and Shang Guanli were locked in place by this finger and could not escape. Li Mu changed his hand seals again and silently recited the 3rd sentence of the Demon Slayer protective incantation. "Fu Hua Heavenly King, descend upon the one of heaven. Heaven Earth Black Yellow Yin Yang Mystical Art. Heavenly Lord Tai, command urgently." The Yin Yang twin fish appeared above his head and formed a huge Taiji diagram. When the finger landed on the Taiji diagram, It did not cause any ripples and was directly swallowed by the Taiji diagram. Heavenly net, Earth Yamaraja, unsheathed sword of wisdom, slay demons and spirits. Heavenly Lord Tai, command urgently. Li Mu changed his hand seals for the last time. The thick power of heaven and earth condensed into an illusory sword in front of him. After this sword appeared, it instantly disappeared and pierced through Cui Ming's chest at an incomprehensible speed. Emperor Song's face was extremely pale. That illusory sword made him feel extreme fear from the bottom of his heart. He was sure that if this sword pierced through his body, only the 8 kings of hell would be left under the nether hell saint. After being pierced by the illusory sword, Cui Ming's body did not change much. However, his aura dropped from the early stage of the 6th realm to the 5th realm. At the same time, the aura on his body also disappeared. Li Mu could no longer feel the aura of the Lord of Illusions. He clapped his hands and looked at Cui Ming, who was struggling to get up. That's it. Chapter 319. After the avatar of the Lord of Illusions was killed, Cui Ming's primordial spirit took over the body again. He crawled up from the ground with difficulty, blood still gushing out from the bloody holes on his body. At this moment his clothes were ragged and his hair was disheveled. Wrinkles appeared on his originally handsome face, and he looked more than 10 years older. He sacrificed his lifespan in exchange for the avatar of the Lord of Illusions to descend. The price was that his lifespan was reduced by at least 10 years, and his cultivation level dropped to the 4th realm. But even so, he was still defeated. In terms of Fulu and magic treasures, he was not as good as Li Mu. In terms of magical powers, he was still inferior. Li Mu had just used a powerful Dao technique that even the avatar of the Lord of Illusions could not escape. Shangguan Li and the 2 internal guards were already prepared to die, but they also watched as Li Mu used a series of moves to beat Cui Ming back to his original state. In a short 15 minutes, they went from despair to hope, and then to despair again. In the extreme darkness, they welcomed the final light. After a short silence, a black-robed figure burst into a cloud of black fog and quickly fled. Want to run? Li Mu looked in the direction that Emperor Song disappeared, and in the next moment, his figure also disappeared. Not long after, in the distant mountains, there were bursts of powerful magical power fluctuations. After 15 minutes, Li Mu's figure floated back to the original place. Shangguan Li and the internal guard had already tied up Cui Ming. Shangguan Li walked over and looked at Li Mu with a complicated gaze and asked, "Where is Emperor Song?" Li Mu stretched out his hand, and a cloud of pure soul power floated in his palm. Su He could have completely awakened a few days ago, but she had been stabilizing her cultivation level in the ice coffin. Su He used half a year to refine 1,000 illusions honored master's soul energy. Then she absorbed the soul energy of those ghosts. Under the effects of the origin pill, when she awoke from the ice coffin, she actually advanced to the middle stage of the ghost soul realm. At that moment, she possessed Li Mu, which meant that Li Mu had the strength of a mid-stage blessed realm cultivator. This allowed him to perform the complete 4th level of the demon slaying protection art, as well as the first 6 words of the 9 syllables. Even if he did not use his Fulu or magical equipment, he would still be able to fight against an opponent in the early stage of the 6th stage. Using Cui Ming's body, the Heavenly Lord of Illusions avatar could not unleash the true strength of a 6th realm cultivator. It was not difficult to kill him. As for Emperor Song, he was only a late-stage spectral soul, so it would be even easier to deal with him. Shangguan Li looked at the soul power of Emperor Song in Li Mu's hand, and her expression became even more complicated. She did not expect that there would be a spy from the demon sect among her subordinates, nor did she expect that Cui Ming would have such a powerful trump card. If Li Mu had not arrived in time, they would have been completely wiped out this time. Su He walked out of Li Mu's body, and Li Mu gave her the soul power of Emperor Song. Then he looked at Cui Ming and said, "Cui Ming is right here. Sister Su can do whatever you want with him." Shangguan Li finally understood that the reason why Li Mu could kill the Heavenly Lord of Illusions avatar was because of this female ghost in front of her. She hesitated and thought for a moment before saying, "Cui Ming is a spy from the demon sect, so he must know a lot of secrets of the demon sect. Can we bring him back to the divine capital first, and search his soul before you can do whatever you want with him? Cui Ming had also seen Suhi. He knelt on the ground and begged. Suhi, I was wrong in the past. Seeing that we were once engaged, please spare me. Suhi looked at Cui Ming. Her gaze was calm, and there were no ripples. She was not as hysterical as Madame Chu when she saw Cui Ming. There was not even hatred in her eyes. She only looked at Cui Ming for a moment before looking away. She said calmly, You can do whatever you want with him. Cui Ming's crying was too noisy. Sheng Guanli decided to seal his primordial spirit. Li Mu's ears were finally much quieter. He took out the spiritual snail and injected his mana into it. He transmitted his voice. Your Majesty, I have already met up with Commander Shengguan. Cui Ming has also been captured. Your Majesty need not worry. Soon a voice came from the spiritual snail. You and Ali are not injured, right? Li Mu replied. Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. Commander Shengguan was slightly injured, but it's not a big deal. Li Mu saw that Shengguanli was looking at the spiritual snail. He passed it to her and said, You can talk to Her Majesty. Shengguanli took the spiritual snail and walked to the side. Li Mu looked at Suhi and asked, Don't you want to take revenge with your own hands? When Li Mu first met Suhi, her hatred for Cui Ming was no less than Madame Chu's. But now, she could no longer feel any hatred from Suhi. Suhi said calmly, He's going to die anyway. Why should I dirty my hands? Li Mu looked at her and seemed to understand something. She did not let Cui Ming go. She let herself go. Like Madame Chu, she had a deep hatred for Cui Ming. But in Madame Chu's eyes, there was only hatred. If women were compared to water, Madame Chu would be a pool of stagnant water. Suhi would be a cheerful mountain spring, always full of life and vitality. Compared to a pool of stagnant water, Li Mu still preferred a lively mountain spring. He was very gratified that Suhi could walk out of her hatred. Her memory was still stuck at the battle with the Treant and the encirclement of a group of ghosts. Li Mu had already told her what happened after, but she still had some questions. She looked at Li Mu and asked, What about her? Li Mu knew who she was asking about. He said, After you fell asleep, I let her go. If she hadn't stopped those ghosts for a moment, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to see you again. Suhi's gaze was somewhat complicated. She had once thought that the female corpse, who had given birth to her own consciousness under the water, would be her mortal enemy. But after she broke out of the formation, she only felt a closeness from her bloodline, because they were originally one. At this time, Shengguanli walked over and handed the spiritual conch to Li Mu, saying, Thank you. Li Mu accepted the spiritual conch and waved his hand, saying, No need to be so polite. We're all on the same side. Besides, Cui Ming and I also have a great hatred. Even without you, I would have killed him. Suhi looked at Li Mu and asked, What hatred do you have against Cui Ming? Li Mu was stunned for a moment. Then he said unhappily, You heartless person. What hatred do I have against Cui Ming? Didn't I do it for you? Suhi rolled her eyes at him and said, I'm a ghost. I don't have a heart to begin with. Li Mu had never taken advantage of Suhi verbally, so he stopped bickering with her. He just reminded Shengguanli. There should be spies from the Meizong sect among the internal guards. You have to remind His Majesty that Cui Ming's capture should not be made public for the time being, so as not to alert the enemy. Since the incarnation of Lord of Illusions was killed, he must have already known that Cui Ming was captured. Perhaps he will remind the spies from the Meizong sect. From now on, we must keep an eye on all suspicious figures in the internal guards and the imperial court. Shengguanli nodded and said, I know. Li Mu asked again, How will you return to Luoyang? Emperor Song was dead, and Cui Ming was also captured. The demon sect would not let it go. They might ambush them on the way. Shengguanli said, His Majesty will send someone to escort us. Then she realized something and asked, You're not going back with us? Li Mu shook his head and said, I'm here on vacation. I just came to see if there were any accidents here. Now that the matter has been resolved, there's nothing else for me to do. You can go back to North County or Yunzhong County first and wait for His Majesty to send someone to escort you. Li Mu was Shangguan Li's subordinate in name. However, Shangguan Li did not say anything about his orders. He had already used his strength to prove that only by listening to him could they overcome all kinds of dangers. Shangguan Li and the 3 internal guards, one was seriously injured and 2 were lightly injured. Li Mu first escorted them back to North County and settled them in the county government. Then he and Su He went to a village outside Yangqiu County. Su He stood in front of a collapsed house at the entrance of the village and did not move for a long time. An old man walked out of a wooden door next door. He looked at Li Mu in confusion and asked, "Young man, where are you from? What are you doing here?" Li Mu pointed at the collapsed house and asked, "Old man, where are the people who used to live here?" "Dead, they're all dead." The old man shook his head and said, "Ever since Xiao He went missing, her parents also left in less than 2 years. Sigh, it's been almost 20 years. I don't know if Xiao He is still alive." Li Mu glanced at Su He beside him and asked, "Old man, where are they buried?" The old man did not answer directly this time. Instead, he looked at Li Mu and asked, "Young man, who are you? Why are you asking about this?" Li Mu said, "I'm a relative of this family." The old man looked at Li Mu and Su He in confusion. Then he pointed to a place not far away and said, "It's over there." The old man buried them personally. Seeing Li Mu and Su He walk over, he scratched his head that did not have many strands of hair and said in surprise, "This girl looks familiar. Where have I seen her before?" Su family village, in the field at the entrance of the village. Su He knelt in front of a lone grave and did not say a word. Li Mu did not say anything either. He silently removed the weeds on the grave. Su He's death was an accident. Before she died, she had a deep resentment so she could become a Yin spirit. However, her parents had died a normal death. Their souls had truly dissipated. After removing the weeds on the grave, he did not disturb Su He. He returned to the entrance of the village and knocked on the wooden door. The old man came out again and asked, "Young man, is there anything else?" Li Mu took out a few banknotes and handed them to the old man. He said, "I'm a relative of this family. Thank you for burying them. Please accept this money as our gratitude." The old man took the banknotes in a daze. When he came back to his senses, the young man in front of him had already walked away. He looked down at the banknotes in his hand and still found it hard to believe. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Only then did he realize that these were really banknotes. Each banknote was worth 100 taels of silver. He had never seen so much money in his life. When he thought of the girl's appearance again, he suddenly thought of something. He shivered and hurriedly ran into the house. As he ran, he said, "Wife, come out quickly. I seem to have met a ghost just now. Come and see if I'm holding a banknote in my hand." Walking out of the Su family village, Li Mu saw that Su He's mood had obviously improved. He asked, "What are you going to do next?" Su He shook her head and said, "I haven't thought about it yet." Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "Why don't you go to Luoyang with me? If we work together, we won't be afraid of Dongxian. I have a big house in Luoyang. You can choose a yard." Su He rolled her eyes and said, "I'm a woman. I'm so young and unmarried. What am I to you if I follow you without any status?" Li Mu thought of what she had just said and said, "You just said that you're a ghost, not a human. Besides, how are you young?" The surrounding temperature suddenly dropped. Li Mu's face suddenly revealed a bright smile. He said, "How is Sister Su young?" Young is used to describe women after the age of 18. In my heart, you will always be 18. Chapter 320. For women. Age was a taboo after the age of 18. Su He actually did not have this problem. She was 18 when she died. From then on, her life would forever be fixed at 18 years old. From a certain point of view, even after 1,000 years or even 10,000 years, she would still be 18. In Yangqiu County, in the old mansion in the county, Li Mu and Su He ate the hot pot that she had been longing for a long time. Su He did not directly promise him that she would go to Luoyang with him in 3 months, but she did not reject him either. She felt guilty for her late parents and wanted to stay here to watch over their graves for a month. For the past 20 years, Su He had been trapped in the Gulf of Clearwater. What she had experienced the most, besides hatred, was loneliness. In the past, she had often blamed Li Mu for not accompanying her. Li Mu had simply released 2 female ghosts, one big and one small, to accompany her. Suhi was obviously bored out of her wits. Li Mu ate hot pot with her 3 times in 2 days. On the 3rd day, Mr. Mei and Shangguan Li arrived at Yangqiu County. The left assistant minister of the Ministry of War came with them. He was under the Empress' orders to escort Shangguan Li and the others back to the divine capital. Most of the 6th realm cultivators in the imperial court were senior officials. The Empress' inner guard had only been established for a short period of time, so there weren't any cultivators above the 6th realm. However, the imperial court had the consecration department, which had many independent cultivators recruited by the imperial court. But this operation was top secret. For safety reasons, the Empress still sent the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War. The Ministry of War and White Deer Institute had always been neutral. They didn't involve themselves in the imperial court. The generals guarded the borders of the Great Zhou. Even if there was a change of regime in the Great Zhou, they wouldn't withdraw their troops. The officials of the Ministry of War were loyal to the current ruler. This time, when they went to Yingzhou to investigate, they passed by Yunzhong County and met Madame Chu, who was looking for Shangguan Li and the others. This was the first time that Suhi and Mrs. Chu had met. Li Mu was a little worried that they would have a conflict, so he secretly looked in their direction a few times. Seeing that they didn't seem to have any intention of fighting, he gradually relaxed. In the corner of the courtyard, Mrs. Chu looked at Suhi and said apologetically, "Miss Su, I'm sorry. At that time, I only knew that you went missing. I didn't know that you were killed by that beast, Cui Ming." Suhi shook her head slightly and said, "You were also harmed by Cui Ming. You don't have to apologize to me." Madame Chu heaved a sigh of relief and said, "I still have to thank you. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid that my soul would have dissipated long ago, and I wouldn't have had the chance to personally take revenge." Suhi was a little surprised and asked, "Why do you say that?" Madame Chu said, "Back in the northern county, in order to take revenge, I became a ghost general under Chu Jiang of Gojoseon. Later on, I almost made a big mistake. Originally, I was going to die at the hands of Lord Cui Ming, but Lord Li learned of my old grudge with Cui Ming and spared my life. He brought me to Luoyang to find an opportunity to identify Cui Ming and take revenge on you." Suhi glanced at Li Mu, who was not far away. Li Mu didn't tell her about these things. She only knew that Cui Ming was a spy from the demon sect, and was being hunted down by the Great Zhou court. She didn't know that there were so many twists and turns before this matter. As for Cui Ming, she didn't tell Li Mu in detail. She only mentioned it twice. When Li Mu woke her up from her deep sleep, Cui Ming was already in front of her, waiting for her to personally take revenge. Obviously, although Li Mu didn't ask her, he kept this matter in mind. She looked at Madame Chu and asked, "What exactly happened in between?" Li Mu didn't look in the direction of Suhi and Madame Chu anymore. This was because Mr. Mei's stare made her feel a little uneasy. Mr. Mei looked him up and down. In the end, he couldn't help but ask, "How did you do it?" Li Mu played dumb and said, "Do what?" Mr. Mei said, "Don't play dumb with me. You're just a level 4 cultivator. How did you defeat Cui Ming, who was possessed by a level 6 cultivator?" Li Mu looked in the direction of Suhi and said, "This is all thanks to Sister Su. If she didn't possess my body, the avatar of the Lord of Illusions could crush me with one finger." Mr. Mei glanced at him and said, "Don't give me that. She's just a level 5 cultivator. Do you think it's so easy to make up for the difference of a level?" Li Mu thought for a while and said, "Actually, after Cui Ming was possessed, his aura was just a little stronger. In reality, he wasn't that strong. With Sister Su's mana and the Dao techniques that my master taught me, it's not strange that I defeated him." Mr. Mei looked at him. It was still uncertain whether Li Mu's old man master really existed. This reason wasn't very convincing. But she couldn't ask anymore. At this time, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War said, "Where is Cui Ming? If we delay, there might be changes. To prevent the demon sect from leaking information, I'll search his soul first. Then, I'll immediately send a message to Luoyang to find the spy in the court." While Shangguan Li and the others were recuperating in the county office, Cui Ming, whose primordial spirit was sealed, was temporarily kept in the flask heaven space by Li Mu to avoid any accidents. As long as he was with Su He, after the two of them combined, even if the demon sect sent someone of the elder level, they wouldn't be able to bring Cui Ming back. Li Mu waved his hand and Cui Ming rolled out of the flask heaven's space. When he was in Luoyang, he was still the assistant minister of the secretariat and the emperor's son-in-law. Without sufficient evidence, it wasn't easy to search his soul. Even if Cui Ming was willing, the court had to use gentle methods to search his soul. But because those methods were too gentle, the results were mediocre and couldn't guarantee the results of the soul search. There was also a violent method to search one's soul. It could forcibly read one's memories and there was no way to hide it. But this violent method caused great damage to the primordial spirit and couldn't be recovered. If this method was used on an official in the court just because of suspicion, the order of the Great Zhou court would completely collapse. But Cui Ming didn't have so many restrictions now. He was no longer a fourth-rank official, nor was he the emperor's son-in-law. He was going to die anyway. Before he died, even if he was searched into a lunatic or an idiot, no one would have any objections. The left assistant minister of the Ministry of War glanced at the unconscious Cui Ming. He reached out and pressed his hand on his head. His palm glowed with a white light. Gradually, Cui Ming's body began to twitch unconsciously. His expression was ferocious and the veins on his forehead bulged. His blood vessels wriggled like earthworms. It was obvious that he was in great pain. After a while, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War retracted his hand and said with a solemn expression, "Among the 4 internal guards, other than the woman you captured, there are 4 others who have been bewitched by Cui Ming to become spies for the Meizong sect." Mr. Mei said in shock. "There are spies in the Meizong sect as well?" The left assistant minister of the Ministry of War nodded and said, "This is just Cui Ming's bewitchment. Who knows how many more spies from the demon sect are hidden in the Great Zhou court." After searching Cui Ming's soul, they only found 4 people. It wasn't a lot, but it wasn't out of Li Mu's expectations. If spies from the demon sect were discovered by the court, only death awaited them. Therefore, they kept their identities as spies a secret. In order to ensure that their identities weren't leaked, spies didn't know each other in most cases. They could only contact each other through a single line. Different spies didn't know each other's identities. This method made it so that even if the court found one spy, they couldn't follow the vine to the melon and find more spies. However, this method also had a fatal flaw. This reminded Li Mu of the infernal affairs. If the spies died, their identities would never be exposed. Not to mention the court, even the Meizong sect didn't know that they had such a spy in the court. There was a possibility that if the spy went back on his word or realized that he was promoted faster in the court, as long as he killed the spies, he could completely clear his identity and become a good citizen of the Great Zhou. He could even become an important official in the court. Of course, the benefits of a single line of communication were obvious. Even if the court caught such an important person like Cui Ming, they could only get rid of a few insignificant people in the internal guards. For the Meizong sect, it wasn't much of a loss. Mr. Mei said with a sullen face, when His Majesty just ascended the throne. "We were too careless when we formed the internal guards. This time, when we return to Luoyang, we must completely clean up the internal guards." She looked at Li Mu and asked, "You really don't want to go back with us?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "I've been busy for more than half a year. Let me take a break and spend time with my family." Mr. Mei wanted to say that His Majesty also needed someone to accompany him. He was the only one in the Great Zhou who could accompany His Majesty. However, she couldn't say it out loud. She could only say, "His Majesty doesn't have many people who can be used. Try to come back as soon as possible." Li Mu nodded and said, I know. Then he glanced at the unconscious Cui Ming who had been violently soul-searched and asked, "What should we do with him?" Mrs. Chu walked over from the side and asked, "Can you leave him to me?" Mr. Mei and Shangguan Li looked at each other and nodded. Cui Ming was useless now. Bringing him back to Luoyang was also a dead end. He used to be an important official in the court, and the emperor's son-in-law. If they brought him back to Luoyang to be executed, everyone would know about it. It would be a loss of face for the court. Mrs. Chu carried the unconscious Cui Ming into Li Mu's former study and closed the door. What are you doing? Don't come over. Yinner, it's all my fault. I beg you to let me go. Let me go. In the room, Cui Ming's horrified voice could be heard. At first, he was still able to speak a complete sentence. Later, all that was left was a series of blood-curdling screams. Shangguan Li and Mr. Mei decisively sealed off their hearing. Li Mu listened to the blood-curdling screams in the room and shuddered. He didn't hesitate to shut off his hearing. After a while, Mrs. Chu walked out of the room expressionlessly. Everything in the room was the same as before. It was as if nothing had changed. However, Cui Ming, who she had just brought in, had completely disappeared. Li Mu sighed in his heart. He probably wouldn't be able to live in this house in peace in the future. It was a pity that his old house. Chapter 321. Cui Ming finally got what he deserved. What goes around comes around. Mrs. Chu died because of him, and he also died in her hands, or perhaps in her mouth. Mrs. Chu had been living for revenge for the past 20 years. Now that she had gotten her revenge, she felt a little lost. Mr. Mei thought for a while and asked, "What do you plan to do in the future?" Mrs. Chu shook her head and said, "I don't know." Mr. Mei said, "If you don't have anywhere to go, you can come back to Fairy's capital with us. If you're willing to become an internal guard, the Imperial Court can provide you with the resources you need for cultivation." After the spy incident was exposed this time, the internal guard suffered a great loss, especially the 5th realm Devil Sect spy. Among the internal guards without a 6th realm, he was already considered a core force. Every loss of one was a great loss to the internal guards. Mrs. Chu was strong enough and had a clean background. She was the most suitable person to recruit. Mrs. Chu was obviously hesitant. She looked at Li Mu. Li Mu said, "This is your own business. You can decide for yourself." Mrs. Chu thought for a while and nodded. "I'm willing." She had to thank two people for getting her revenge. One was Li Mu, and the other was the Empress. Li Mu didn't need her to stay by his side. She could only do something for the Empress to repay her kindness. Mr. Mei and Shangguan Li left under the escort of the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War. Li Mu lay on a stone chair in the courtyard and sighed in relief. It's finally over. He had been worried about Cui Ming's matter for several months, and now the dust had finally settled. He had gotten his revenge on Suhi. He had also escaped from the Bay of Clearwater and regained his freedom. He had also reconciled with the female corpse. Li Mu had a lot of things off his mind. He felt relaxed. He lay on the stone chair. A pair of hands rested on his shoulders and gently massaged them. Left, a little to the left. Yes, here. A little to the right. Over, come back a little. Li Mu closed his eyes comfortably. Then he realized that Wanwan and Xiaobai were not here. Who was massaging his shoulders? He immediately opened his eyes. Suhi looked at him with a smile and asked, "Are you comfortable?" Li Mu stood up and hurriedly said, "I didn't know it was you." Just as he stood up, he was pressed down by Suhi. She put her hand on Li Mu's shoulder and said, "You helped me take revenge. Consider it as me repaying you." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "What kind of relationship do we have?" "There's no need to talk about repayment," Suhi asked. "What's our relationship?" Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "You saved my life, and I saved yours. We are friends of life and death. We are not brother and sister, but we are more than brother and sister." Suhi said, "Only brother and sister?" "When we were at the Bay of Clearwater, you called me your wife," Li Mu hurriedly explained. "That was a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. I can swear that I never had that kind of thought about you." As soon as he finished speaking, his expression changed. He grabbed her hand and said, Gentler, it hurts." Suhi picked him up and said, "Stinky brother, how can an older sister serve her younger brother? It's your turn to massage me." Women really change their expressions as quickly as flipping a book. In this regard, Suhi and Lu Hanyan were no different. Li Mu stayed at the old mansion for another half a day before preparing to return to Mount Baiyun. Suhi had to stay here temporarily to watch over her parents' graves. Li Mu planned to come back and ask her about it before returning to Luoyang. After Li Mu left, Suhi stood at the door and watched his figure disappear. Her face no longer had the frivolous and lively expression she had when Li Mu was around. She sighed softly and said with melancholy, "If only I was born 20 years later, how good would that be?" The two ghosts, one big and one small, stood at the door. The small ghost couldn't help but ask Suhi, "Sister, why didn't you tell him what was in your heart?" Suhi rubbed her head and said, "Humans and ghosts walk different paths. You will understand in the future." She turned and walked into the courtyard, softly humming a nameless song. "When I was born, you were not born. When you were born, I was already old. When I was far from you, you were at the end of the world. When we were born at the same time, I vowed to be with you. When we were not older, how much did I feel? So close, yet so far, so hard to express my feelings." Li Mu returned to Mount Baiyun and learned that Lu Hanyan still hadn't come out of seclusion. Yu Zhenzi was only one step away from transcendence. She brought Lu Hanyan into seclusion with her, which would be of great benefit to Lu Hanyan. If she could advance to the creation realm a day earlier, Li Mu would be able to fly away with her a day earlier. Without her, Li Mu also went into seclusion on Mount Baiyun. He borrowed a Fulu encyclopedia from Hanja. Li Mu also knew a lot of Fulu, but it was all basic. These basic Fulu books only accounted for less than 1% of the Fulu books in the Fulu school. Apart from a few precious Fulu books, most of the Fulu books in the Fulu school were public. They weren't worried about outsiders stealing their knowledge. On the contrary, whether it was the ancestral court of Fulu school or the major branches, they all hoped that the Fulu school could be carried forward. Naturally, the more people who understood the Tao of Fulu, the better. Fulu School, Spirit Array School, and Pill Cauldron School, compared to the South School, North School and Xuanzong School, which had a longer history, were all unconventional. They blazed a new path outside of the great Tao of remarkable abilities, so they paid more attention to the inheritance of the school. Most cultivators could learn the Tao of remarkable abilities, but Fulu alchemy and the Tao of formations had a higher requirement of talent. Fulu and alchemy were especially difficult. Almost all cultivators could get started, but if they wanted to take a step further and become a master of talisman and pill Tao, it wouldn't be so easy. The Empress was extremely wealthy, but she could only give Li Mu normal heaven-level Fulu. In the current cultivation world, Fulu mid-level heaven-level and above could only be made by Fulu school. If he kept getting Fulu from Lu Hanyan and the Empress, he would be suspected of living off them. As a man, Li Mu's pride wouldn't allow him to keep relying on women. Now that he had enough free time, he could study the Tao of Fulu in Fulu school. In the future, he would be able to draw them himself. On White Cloud Peak, Li Mu was in seclusion studying Fulu. In the ghost region of Yudu, on a mountain peak that was forever shrouded by the curtain of night, there was an eerie palace. A black shadow that had just finished his seclusion looked at an extinguished soul lamp in the palace and roared angrily. "Who exactly killed Emperor Song? If I catch you, I will definitely extract your soul and refine it." The few ghost generals that were kneeling in the palace trembled under the pressure of this powerful aura. Chu Jiang of Gojoseon had just died for less than a year, and now Emperor Song had been murdered. In a short period of time, only 8 of the 10 kings of hell were left. In the future, they might as well call him the 8th king of hell. The black shadow rushed into the sky and quickly disappeared into the endless night sky. Country of demons, southeast, 100,000 mountains. The southeast of the demon country was adjacent to the northwest of the Great Zhou. The 100,000 mountains spanned the demon country and the Great Zhou, connecting the life continent and the Zhu continent. The country of demons wasn't like the Great Zhou, which was a unified country. The demon country was divided by demons. Within the life continent, there were no less than 100 demon countries of various sizes. The larger demon countries ruled over a region, while the smaller demon countries relied on the larger demon countries to survive. In the demon capital of a certain demon country, in the palace, an extremely handsome middle-aged man walked out of an underground secret chamber. Outside the secret chamber, everyone, including the demon king of the demon country, knelt down and said loudly, "Greetings, Heavenly Lord." The handsome middle-aged man said indifferently, "Cui Ming is dead." The men and women kneeling outside the secret chamber were all unusually handsome. One of the men said in shock, "Heavenly Lord already sent a clone to help him. How could he still die?" Could it be that the great Zhou country sent an expert of the upper realm? The middle-aged man waved his hand, and an image appeared in the sky. In the image, there were 7 bloody holes on Cui Ming's body. It was obvious that the clone of the Heavenly Lord had taken over his body. Opposite him was a handsome young man. The young man successively executed 4 types of extremely powerful divine abilities and Dharma spells, which easily destroyed the spirit clone of the Lord of Heaven. After a short moment of silence, there was an uproar. Who is this person? How can he have such a powerful magic art? To be able to kill the clone of the Heavenly Lord so easily, he must be at the 6th realm. But how can there be such a young 6th realm cultivator? This person's magic art is too terrifying. If anyone below the 6th realm encounters him, there is only death. The scene of the Heavenly Lord's clone being killed really shocked everyone. Cui Ming, who was possessed by the Heavenly Lord's clone, had strength that was infinitely close to the 6th realm, but he was killed by this person with a series of magic arts. If it were anyone else, they would also die. In the crowd, Huanji looked at Li Mu in disbelief. If he had shown the strength in the image last time, she probably wouldn't have survived until today. The Heaven Lord of Illusions looked at them and asked, "Do you know who this person is?" Huanji walked forward and said, "Father, his name is Li Mu. He is an official of the Great Zhou. He was the one who almost captured me last time." Li Mu, the Heaven Lord of Illusions said lightly, "If we let him grow, he will definitely become a huge threat to the demon sect. Pass down my order. Anyone who can kill this person will be able to obtain a treasure personally refined by me." Everyone's eyes burned with excitement when they heard this. The Heaven Lord was at the 7th realm. If he could obtain a treasure personally refined by him, it could easily increase his strength, and even give him an extra life. But when they thought of how terrifying Li Mu's magic arts were, it was as if a bucket of cold water was poured over their heads. Instantly, they didn't want to think about anything else. The Heaven Lord of Illusions looked at Huanji and said, "That clone was destroyed. I need to go into seclusion for a period of time. I will leave the Mirage sect and Meizong sect to you for the time being. If you encounter something important, you can discuss it with the elders." Huanji bowed and said, "Yes." The Heaven Lord of Illusion's body disappeared into thin air. Huanji raised her head and looked at everyone. She said, "Send a message to all the sections. Whoever can capture Li Mu will be heavily rewarded by the Heaven Lord." "That's right, tell them that I only want him alive, not dead." Everyone nodded and left. Huanji waved the 2 whips in her hands and said, "You better pray that you don't fall into my hands." Although the 10 demon sects were not a whole, there was little hostility between them. Most of the time, they cooperated. Between each sect, there was a special method of communication. In just a few days, the news of the Mirage sect and Meizong sect offering a reward for an official named Li Mu spread throughout the 10 demon sects. The reward of the Heaven Lord was extremely attractive to them. For a time, countless people began to inquire about who this Li Mu was. White Cloud Peak. In the dead of night, Li Mu sat cross-legged on his bed and sneezed a few times. He guessed that someone was thinking of him. There was only one person who would think of him in the middle of the night. The northern county was too far away from the divine capital. Ever since he left the divine capital, the Empress could no longer meet him every night through the dream invasion technique. So he picked up the spirit conch and used his magic power to activate it. He sent a message, "Your Majesty, are you asleep?" Chapter 322. Just as Li Mu had guessed, the Empress was single and didn't have a nightlife. She hadn't slept yet. Actually, when Li Mu was in Chengdu, she still had a nightlife. Her nightlife was to run into Li Mu's dreams, play chess with him, and teach him how to cultivate. After Li Mu left Chengdu, she had nothing to do at night. Li Mu felt that if the Empress were to give him the Best Minister of Great Zhou award, it could only go to him. Even when he was on vacation, he didn't forget to do things for her. He saved Shangguanli and captured Cui Ming. After finishing his work, he still had to worry about the Empress's private affairs. He was worried that she would be lonely at night, so he even called her to ask about her. From his conversation with the Empress, Li Mu learned that many things had happened in Chengdu while he was away. The biggest one was Mr. May's purge of the internal guards. Other than a few demon sect spies who were found and executed, the internal guards had also undergone a major change. When the Empress had just ascended the throne, she had nothing but the throne. The entire imperial court was controlled by the old and new parties. The establishment of the inner guards was a way for her to cultivate her own strength. However, because the inner guards were established in a hurry, the quality of the inner guards was uneven. In the past few years, after the Empress's position was stabilized, these problems were gradually exposed. However, there weren't many internal guards to begin with. After the purge, they were obviously understaffed. After being warned by the demon sect spies, Mr. May and Shangguanli would rather be understaffed in the future than make up the numbers. If they were infiltrated by someone with ulterior motives, it would cause even more trouble in the future. This time, if Li Mu hadn't coincidentally returned to Beijing, Shangguanli's team would have been wiped out, and even more powerful cultivators from the court would have been killed. After talking about Chengdu, the Empress suddenly asked, "Did you teach anyone else the chant you taught me last time?" Li Mu didn't know why all the women would care about this question. They weren't Lin Daiyu, and the chant wasn't a thing. Why couldn't the chant be taught to them? In the end, Li Mu nodded and said, "Yes." The Empress was silent for a moment, then asked, "Who else?" Li Mu said honestly, "Other than your Majesty, there is also my fiancée, a little girl by her side, Xiao Bai, and a friend of mine." The Empress was silent for a while before asking, "Is that friend of yours a man or a woman? Can he be trusted?" Li Mu nodded and said, "She is a woman and one of the people this subject trusts the most. She is also the first person other than this subject to know this chant." The Empress reminded him, "Recently, I have discovered that this mnemonic chant is not as simple as it seems. It is best that you do not spread it out so easily." This was something Li Mu had told Li Qing when he taught the Clear Heart chant to her. Although the Clear Heart chant didn't have any attack power, in Li Mu's mind, it was undoubtedly the strongest support chant. If one's mind was unstable, it could be used to clear one's mind. If one was trapped in an illusion, it could be used to break the illusion. It could keep one's mind clear when one's soul was being controlled. And it could also keep one's mind clear when one was writing talismans. The former could be used to steal the sky and fake the sun, and the latter's effect was even more heaven-defying. It could increase the success rate of writing high-level fulu, and it could greatly save the time and materials needed to write talismans. In the same amount of time, the Clear Heart chant could write 10 fulu that could originally only be written once. The same materials, 9 batches would be wasted to make 1 fulu. Now, perhaps one wouldn't even need to waste a single batch. Li Mu knew better than anyone that if one had an endless supply of high-grade talismans in one's possession during a battle, then it would cause a great psychological trauma to one's opponent. It could be said that a single heart cleansing technique would allow the talisman puppet sect to become the #1 sect in the Dao sects. There were too many stakes involved in this. Thus, Li Qing reminded him that it was best not to spread this mnemonic chant. Up until now, the people that Li Mu taught were all his own people. Whether it was Lu Hanyan, Wanwan, or Xiaobai, Li Mu hoped that they would have more trump cards to protect themselves. To him, compared to their safety, he didn't care at all which sect was the #1 Taoist sect. Lu Hanyan was his fiancée, Wanwan was her dowry, and Xiaobai would be with him for the rest of his life. As for Li Qing, he had an irreplaceable position in Li Mu's heart. No matter how you looked at it, only the Empress was an outsider. Li Mu thought for a moment, then said, "This mnemonic chant was passed down to me by Master. There's no need to spread it. I'll make an exception and pass it down to Her Majesty. I hope that Her Majesty won't spread it out again." In Chengdu, in Chang'e Palace, Zhou Yi's face was filled with indignation. He had passed down this mnemonic chant to so many people, and none of them were considered exceptions. Why was it that when it came to her, it was an exception? To think that she had been so good to him, and rewarded him with so many things. She had even given him the precious origin pill. Whenever she encountered a good tribute, she would leave a portion for him. She had even made a life talisman for him. In the end, she was just an outsider who had made an exception? This made her feel that her sincerity had been misplaced. No more sounds came from the other side. And this made Li Mu a little vigilant. The Empress's thinking time was usually between 1 to 3 breaths. After 3 breaths, it would be an abnormal pause. What was it that caused her to pause abnormally? It was already late at night, and no one in the palace would dare to disturb her. In other words, the cause of her abnormal pause was very likely Li Mu himself. Could it be that what he had said was wrong? Li Mu's mind spun rapidly, and he immediately realized that he had made a fatal mistake. The Empress was someone who was extremely lacking in love. If he loved her, she would return it tenfold. However, if he made her feel that there was no love, the damage to her would be several times greater than that of a normal person. What he had said just now might have made her feel that she was an outsider. Li Mu's mind spun rapidly. In an instant, he thought of countless ways to apologize and explain, but they were all rejected by him in an instant. All apologies and explanations were made up after the fact. Making up after the fact would never allow a relationship to return to how it was before. Li Mu made a prompt decision and adjusted his emotions. He sighed slowly and said, "When your Majesty heard what I said just now, did you also feel that I did not treat your Majesty as one of my own? Did you feel that I had misplaced my sincerity?" Zhou Yi was clearly stunned. Li Mu's words directly pointed out her true thoughts. Her lips moved, and she was about to speak, but Li Mu did not give her the chance. He sighed again and said, "I only said one sentence to your Majesty, and your Majesty already felt this way. Last time, your Majesty was so cold to me, so heartless. Compared to what I just said, your Majesty was 1,000 times, 10,000 times more hurtful. Your Majesty should now know how sad I was that time, bringing up old scores and making false accusations." This was a move that Li Mu had learned from some women in his previous life. When he was at his wit's end, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration and used it without even thinking. This move was very exquisite. In a situation where he was in the wrong, by bringing up old scores and making false accusations, he could instantly turn from passive to active. For people like Lu Hanyan and Su He, who were smart, using this move naturally meant that he did not want to die quickly enough. However, against someone like the Empress, who was Xiaobai, this was simply the best weapon. As expected, after Li Mu spoke, the Empress did not mention what had just happened. Instead, her voice was somewhat flustered as she said, "What happened last time? It was my fault. Why do you still remember?" Seeing that this move was effective, Li Mu struck while the iron was hot and said, "How could I forget? That was the greatest grievance I had suffered in my life. Even now, when I think about it, I still find it hard to calm down. Let's stop here for today. I will go to bed first." "Good night, Your Majesty." After saying that, Li Mu put down the conch and let out a long sigh of relief. Although he acted like an unreasonable and unruly girlfriend just now, it was better for the Empress to feel that Li Mu had been left out than for her to feel that she had been left out. After all, if he was wronged, it would be fine with a little coaxing. If the Empress was wronged, Li Mu would have to suffer a few lashes, and she might not even be able to forgive him. In Changel Palace, Zhou Yi was lying on the bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. She hesitated in her heart. Should she wait until Li Mu returned to Shendu, and simply erase this memory of him? On Baiyun Peak, there was no danger tonight. Li Mu slept on Lu Hanyan's bed and quickly fell asleep. In his dream he met the Empress again. The Empress looked at him anxiously and said, "My dear concubine, this matter is really my fault. Listen to my explanation." Li Mu covered his ears and shook his head. "I don't want to listen, I don't want to listen, I don't want to listen." In the room, Li Mu suddenly jumped up from the bed. He covered his face and said with endless fear, "No." In the morning, Li Mu woke up early and walked around the peaks of Baiyun Peak to relax. Recently, he seemed to have some mental problems. This made Li Mu quite worried. He was a dignified man, How could he have such strange dreams? He thought about it carefully and quickly found the problem. Last night, he used the method of bringing up old scores and making false accusations to deal with the Empress. This was not a method that a man should use. He had positioned himself as the Empress's unruly boyfriend, so he should not complain about having such dreams at night. In the future, he could not treat the Empress like this. Any reasonable and normal person would not do such a thing. If this continued, this dream would probably never end. The scenery of Baiyun Peak was very beautiful. Li Mu walked around for a while, and the fear in his heart gradually dissipated. Unknowingly, he arrived at the main peak. At this time, it was time for the main peak's disciples to have their morning classes. Close to 100 disciples sat cross-legged in the square in front of the main peak's Tao Palace. They had their eyes closed and were meditating. Above their heads, a huge bell floated there. It slowly and rhythmically rang. Under the ethereal sound of the bell, all the distracting thoughts in the hearts of the disciples were washed away in the square. The disciples cultivated quietly. In the sky above the square, cranes danced and white clouds lingered. Everything was so harmonious. Buzz! In the next instant, the sound of the Tao bell suddenly became countless times louder. Screech! A few flying cranes let out a cry and fell straight down from the sky. Under the sound of the bell, the faces of the Fulu school disciples in the square flushed red. The magic power in their bodies surged. Those with lower cultivation levels fainted directly. In front of the square, Li Mu stared blankly at the Tao bell. He immediately said, "Sorry, I've come to the wrong place. I'll leave now. Chapter 323. Because of the unbelievable nightmare last night, Li Mu had been worried about his psychological problems this morning. He had completely forgotten that the ancestral court of Fulu School, on the main peak of White Cloud Mountain, had a grudge with him. Li Mu's grudge with the Tao bell was purely accidental. He did not know that the bell could sense the first Tao technique that descended into this world. Then, because of the Tao Te Ching, it overreacted and a deep crack appeared on the bell. But no matter what, the Tao bell had cracked because of him. Now it was hiding from him whenever it saw him. Li Mu had obviously scared it. The last sound of the bell did not sound right. The red-crowned cranes flying in the sky were stunned by the sound of the bell. They fell from the sky to the square, their bodies twitching non-stop. Most of the disciples in the square also fainted from the shock. Li Mu knew that he had caused trouble. He was about to escape when the Tao bell ran faster than him. With a whoosh, it flew into the clouds and floated there, not daring to come down. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. On the main peak, several figures rushed into the sky from the various Tao palaces. Seeing the mess on the square, everyone was shocked. What happened to the red-crowned cranes? Why did so many disciples faint? Why did the Tao bell run away again? What was that sound just now? It gave me a fright. My hand even trembled. It's a pity that my Fulu painting was almost finished. The elders of the main peak floated above the square and looked at each other in confusion. Then someone looked at the edge of the square and saw a figure preparing to escape. It's him. Why is he here? I see. So he's junior sister Lu's Tao partner. I was wondering why the bell was so scared. Li Mu originally wanted to run away, but he had been recognized so quickly. He could only turn around and bite the bullet. Well, I really didn't do it on purpose. A few elders descended from the sky. Some began to treat the twitching red-crowned cranes, while others began to wake up the unconscious disciples. An old man with a creation realm cultivation walked over and smiled at Li Mu. It's okay. It's not the first time the Tao bell has changed. I know you didn't mean it. Buzz in the clouds above the square, the law bell rang again, clearly venting its displeasure. Not long after, the red-crowned crane flew back into the clouds. However, it did not dare to stay on White Cloud Peak. It flew towards a distant mountain. The disciples who were knocked unconscious by the sound of the bell gradually regained consciousness. Each of them had a blank expression on their faces. What happened? Why did I suddenly faint just now? The Tao bell suddenly went crazy. Look, isn't that the person who made the Tao bell go crazy last time? Suddenly, he sensed something and opened his eyes to look ahead. Outside the window, a shadow flashed past. Li Mu flew off the bed and came to the courtyard. However, he did not see anything. He pretended to return to his room. However, he suddenly turned around and looked up at the sky. A corner of the Dao bell appeared in the clouds above his head. However, it quickly shrank back. Li Mu was shocked. Did the Dao bell finally understand that he was no match for him? Was it here to seek revenge? However, it did not seem like it. Li Mu only glanced at it, and it hid in the clouds. If it was here to seek revenge, it would not be so cowardly. Li Mu turned and walked back to his room. However, he secretly stuck a paper figurine on the door. After he entered the room, he silently observed from the paper figurine's perspective. In the clouds, the Dao bell's shadow appeared again. It first carefully lowered its height. When it saw that Li Mu did not come out, it quickly flew to where Li Mu was standing and slowly rotated. Li Mu looked at it strangely. He did not know what the Dao bell was up to. He carefully observed the Dao bell through the paper figurine. The Dao bell was about 10 feet tall. Its body was so thick that it would take several people to wrap their arms around it. Li Mu had not looked at it carefully before. Now that he looked at it closely, he realized that there were complicated runes on the Dao bell. These runes were simple and ancient, but they were also quite beautiful. However, there was a deep crack on the Dao bell. While it destroyed a few of the runes, it also destroyed some of the Dao bell's beauty. The culprit behind this crack was Li Mu. Li Mu was actually quite aggrieved about this matter. He had only recited a few incantations. Reciting incantations was not against the law. The Dao bell seemed to have a function. It was to magnify the changes in the power of heaven and earth caused by new magical powers and Dao techniques. When Li Mu cast a spell in Yangqiu County, the changes in the power of heaven and earth were not felt by the powerhouses of Mount Baiyun. However, the Dao bell could magnify the fluctuations. Li Mu could imagine what it would be like when it tried to magnify the power of heaven and earth caused by the Dao De Jing. Even someone as reckless as Li Mu would not dare to recite it casually unless it was a matter of life and death. He wished that its power would be weakened by 10 times or even 100 times. This Dao bell actually wanted to magnify it. It was simply seeking death more than Li Mu himself. However, even though Dao Zhong was courting death, Li Mu still couldn't shirk his responsibility in this matter. He carefully observed the Dao bell's rotation on the spot. He was gradually surprised to find that as it rotated, the edge of the crack on the Dao bell emitted an extremely weak golden light. Li Mu was stunned. Could this Dao bell be repairing itself? But why did it come here to repair itself? Could it be that there was something around Li Mu that could help it repair itself? Li Mu carefully probed, and did not feel anything unusual around him. However, the Dao bell's spiritual sense was many times stronger than that of a human. Perhaps it could sense something that Li Mu could not. Li Mu walked out of the room again. The Dao bell immediately flew up and hid in the clouds again. Li Mu stood in the courtyard and looked at the clouds in the sky. He said, "You don't have to hide anymore. I can see you." The Dao bell flew out from the clouds and buzzed non-stop. It was unknown what it was saying. Although Li Mu could not understand its words, it was obvious that the Dao bell could understand Li Mu's meaning. Li Mu looked up at it and said, "I didn't do it on purpose last time. Come down." The Dao bell buzzed for a while. Not only did it not come down, but it flew even higher. Li Mu thought for a while and said, "I swear on the heavenly Dao that I won't do anything to you. I'll just stand here and not move." After the Dao bell stopped in the air for a while, it seemed like it wanted to escape, but it also seemed like it couldn't bear to let go of something. After a while, it tried to descend a little, then a little more. When it saw that Li Mu didn't move, it gradually became bolder and flew to Li Mu's side. It circled around him continuously. Li Mu noticed that there were more golden light spots on the cracks on the Dao bell. The cracks seemed to be slowly mending at a speed that was not visible to the naked eye. This meant that he had something that the Dao bell needed. However, Li Mu carefully probed and did not find anything missing. It was not spiritual power, psyche power, or any other power within his body. After the Dao bell spun for a while, the golden light spots on the cracks dissipated, and the cracks seemed to be mending a little. Li Mu could not figure it out. He simply said, I was the one who caused the cracks on your body. I have the responsibility to help you repair them. What do you need? I can help you. Li Mu had clearly gained some trust from the Dao bell. The Dao bell buzzed again. Although there were no specific syllables or words, Li Mu miraculously understood its meaning. Li Mu asked in surprise, You need a new mystique Dao technique? The Dao bell danced up and down, clearly indicating that it was nodding. Li Mu reached out and touched the cracks on the Dao bell. This time, the Dao bell not only did not dodge, but it even rubbed against his hand. However, it was huge and Li Mu was almost knocked over by it. He patted the Dao bell and said casually, You're so big. It's not convenient for you to be beside me. Can you shrink a little? The Dao bell buzzed and shrank rapidly. Finally, it became a small bell the size of a palm. It jumped up and down and circled around Li Mu. Li Mu looked at the scene in front of him in shock and exclaimed, It really can. Chapter 324. It was Li Mu who had cracked the Fulu school's Dao bell, so he had the responsibility to repair it. According to the message conveyed by the Dao bell, every time a new Dao technique or divine ability was created, a strange power would descend. It relied on this strange power to repair itself. In theory, as long as Li Mu could continuously create new divine abilities or Dao techniques, it would quickly be repaired. Although Li Mu did not have this ability, he had the support of Taoism from another world. Speaking of which, there were many things that were fated to happen. In his previous life, he had been seriously ill. He had tried Western medicine and traditional Chinese medicine, but none of them were effective. His mother had suffered a blow because of this, but she did not want to give up. In the end, she had placed her hopes on metaphysics. During that time, she had worshipped and entered every temple she saw. She had brought home Buddhist beads consecrated by eminent monks and Fulu personally written by a half-immortal. Not only that, but because of Li Mu's illness, his mother, who had originally been an atheist, had also started to worship Buddhism and Taoism. She had bought a lot of Buddhist and Taoist scriptures and read them day and night, praying for Buddha and Taoists to bless Li Mu's recovery. Even though Li Mu did not believe in metaphysics at that time, he did not want his mother to lose hope. Therefore, he forced himself to memorize some Buddhist scriptures and Taoist scriptures. When he had nothing to do, he would flip through the mountains of books at home. However, ever since his parents had gone to a mountain to worship Buddha, and their car had accidentally rolled off a cliff, Li Mu had never touched these things again. After coming to this world, Li Mu gradually realized that the things he had abandoned in the past had great power in this world. Unfortunately, Li Mu had already used the 9 words mantra, the demon-slaying protection incantation, and other Dao techniques countless times. What the Dao bell needed could only be found when a Dao technique first appeared. However, this was not a problem. There were many Taoist Dharma spells. Just the Thunder Dharma alone had more than 100 types of Dharma spells. Although they were all Thunder Dharma spells, their powers were all different. The Lin formula was the fastest and strongest Thunder Dharma spell. The others appeared to be of little value. Li Mu did not even try them. Although it was of little value, it was something that had never existed in this world before. Once it was used, it would be a brand new divine ability. Apart from these, there were too many spells in the Exalted 3 Divine Caves incantation that Li Mu didn't try. The reason was that although many spells had different incantations and hand seals, their effects were the same. There were countless types of lightning spells, and it was enough to learn one. Since there were already ready-made spells in this world, Li Mu didn't need to spend a lot of time and energy trying out the corresponding hand seals. He only felt a little regretful now. If he had known that this day would come, he would have read all the Taoist and Buddhist scriptures. Perhaps he would have more trump cards now. Li Mu put these thoughts away. When he was in Yangqiu County, he had spent a lot of time trying out the incantations that he remembered. At that time, he had only condensed one spirit of cultivation. Many times, when he felt that using those Dharma spells would backfire on him, he would immediately stop. Now that his cultivation had reached the level of divine ability, it was naturally no problem for him to use those Dharma spells of the past. Li Mu's left hand formed the thunder seal and said silently, Flying Hellfire, Divine Thunder. Up and down Tai Chi, the four dimensions of the world. Overturning the heavens and overturning the mountains, boiling the seas and destroying the mountains. The sixth dragon drum vibrates and orders the pursuit. Urgent as the Dharma commands. As his voice fell, a white thunderbolt descended from the sky. Li Mu waved his hand and dispersed it. The Tao bell, which had already turned into the size of Li Mu's palm, let out a crisp sound. It spun around Li Mu. Golden spots of light began to appear on the cracks on the bell. Seeing that this method was indeed effective, Li Mu's hand seal changed into the green spirit seal. He silently chanted the snow prayer incantation, flying hellfire, east spirit. Superior immortal master, auspicious light condenses. Astral wind scissors water, change jade flower. Majestic righteousness, heaven and earth cleanse. True king perfunctory, divine transformation jade sutra. Urgent as the Dharma commands. Not long after the incantation was finished, snowflakes fluttered in the air and fell from the sky. The Tao bell flew up and down in the snow. It was as lively as a dog. Li Mu stretched out his hand. A snowflake landed on his hand and slowly melted. In the past, he had thought that only spells that used insignificant cultivation to stir up the power of heaven and earth could be called Taoist spells. Later on, he gradually realized that spells that were classified as supernatural powers, such as summoning wind and summoning rain and praying snow, could also be called Taoist spells. The essence of Taoist spells was to use one's own Dharma powers to trigger changes in heaven and earth. The reason why they were not classified as Taoist spells was because cultivators were used to thinking that Taoist spells were bound to be powerful. These spells were not worthy of being called Taoist spells. However, to Li Mu, although these spells were not very powerful, they could still be of great use when gathered together. However, Li Mu did not intend to hand over all his stock today. He stroked the Tao bell and said, "Let's call it a day. We'll come back tomorrow." The Tao bell circled around Li Mu a few times. It seemed to be reluctant to part with him. After a long time, it turned into a stream of light and disappeared in the direction of the main peak. Wanwan and Xiaobai had run off somewhere. Li Mu returned to his room. He was bored to death. He took out the spirit snail and inserted a strand of Dharma powers. From last night until now, Zhou Yi's heart had been restless. She thought countless times about whether what she did to Li Mu in the past was too much. If he was angry, what would she do if he stayed in the North County and did not return to the divine capital? Should she sincerely apologize to him? She did not sleep the whole night. She kept thinking about this problem, until Li Mu's voice came from the spirit snail. He seemed to have forgotten about last night's unhappiness, and did not mention it again. Only then did Zhou Yi relax. At the same time, she was also gratified. Although he was sometimes petty and willful, he was still very reasonable most of the time. Today, when he was chatting with the Empress, Li Mu did not dare to be unreasonable. He had thought about it thoroughly today. The Empress was so innocent. It was too inhumane to use such tricks on such an innocent girl. Of course, he was also worried that he would have nightmares again at night. Li Mu did not mention what happened last night. He only mentioned the Tao bell to the Empress. Tao bell. After hearing this, Zhou Yi said, "I've only heard that it is the spiritual treasure of the Fulu school. I've never seen it before." Fulu school was one of the 6 Taoist sects. Li Mu originally thought that the spiritual treasure of such a sect would be very impressive. He did not expect such a cowardly bell to be the spiritual treasure of a sect. In Li Mu's eyes, it seemed to have no other use other than being a Taoist detector. Zhou Yi continued, "According to historical records, the ancestral court of Fulu school has encountered many crises in the history of the school. They were all resolved by this bell." Li Mu was stunned. He said in disbelief, "This bell is so powerful?" Zhou Yi said, "This bell is not ordinary. Its sound can not only purify one's Taoist heart, but it can also be used to shock enemies. The bell can be big or small. When it is small, it is like sand. When it is big, it is like a mountain. It is also the strongest defensive treasure known to the cultivation world. Hundreds of years ago, when the ancestral court of Fulu school was besieged by the demon sect, it was the Tao bell that covered Mount Baiyun. The demon sect's several transcendents and more than 10 Dongxian experts were unable to break through. Li Mu was extremely suspicious. Was the Dao Bell that ran away when it saw him, and the Dao Bell that the Empress was talking about the same? If the Dao Bell was really so powerful, how could it be cracked because of the Dao De Ching? Li Mu quickly realized that this might not be the Dao Bell's fault. It dared to infinitely amplify the power of heaven and earth activated by the Dao De Ching. The fact that the Dao Bell had only cracked a small crack was enough to show its strength. If that was the case, if he obtained the Dao Bell and couldn't defeat his opponent head-on, all he had to do was shrink into the bell, and he would be in an invincible position. This was the direction that a qualified cultivator should strive to cultivate in. He didn't expect the cowardly bell to be so powerful. When he thought about hiding in the Dao Bell and fighting, Li Mu's heart immediately burned with passion. He couldn't help but look forward to the next day. After chatting with the Empress for a while, Li Mu put away the conch and sorted out the spells in his mind that he hadn't used yet. The next morning, Li Mu woke up early and went to the courtyard. At the same time, on the main peak, nearly 100 disciples of the Fu school had also started their daily morning classes. For cultivators, cultivating the heart was extremely important. Once the heart of cultivation wasn't firm or unstable, one's cultivation would stagnate and regress. In serious cases, one would suffer from qi deviation or even death. Thus, the disciples of the 7 branches would take turns every 7 days to ascend the main peak and listen to the sound of the Dao Bell. The Dao Bell was the treasure of the Fu school. It emitted a certain sound that could cleanse a cultivator's heart and reduce the possibility of inner demons breeding. A group of disciples sat cross-legged in the square in front of the Dao Palace on the main peak. They closed their eyes and focused, preparing to be cleansed by the Dao Bell. However, they sat for a long time and didn't hear the sound of the bell. Finally, someone couldn't help but look up. He realized that there were only a few white clouds above his head. There was no sign of the Dao Bell. He was stunned. Where's the bell? White Cloud Peak. Li Mu withdrew his hand and looked at the Dao Bell that was flying toward him. A fervent smile appeared on his face. If the Empress hadn't reminded him, he wouldn't have realized that the Dao Bell was a treasure. If he could trick it into his hands, thinking of this, Li Mu's smile widened. The Dao Bell that was flying toward him suddenly stopped. Then, as if it had been frightened, it quickly retreated and hid in the clouds. Li Mu was stunned. Could it be that his smile was too perverted and scared the cowardly bell? He coughed softly and tried his best to make his smile normal. He waved his hand at the cloud and said, "Come down. I just cast a new spell for you." The Dao Bell peeked out a corner of the cloud and quickly retreated. Li Mu thought to himself that he had been careless. Given the Dao Bell's personality, if he scared it this time, it probably wouldn't be so easy to get close to it next time. Li Mu didn't say anything else. His hand gestures changed rapidly as he silently chanted a spell. Jade Purity's signal, descend the lightning. 3 departments and 6 residences, left and right spirit lords. Crystal of the sun, flowing light of the moon. Sweep away the evil and destroy all disasters. The celestial emperor receives the wind and commands the sky. In thy name in my palm. Grasp the heaven and earth. Protect me. After casting several new spells in succession, a buzzing sound finally came from the clouds. The Dao Bell flew out of the clouds and cheerfully flew toward Li Mu. Chapter 325. Baiyun Mountain Main Peak Plaza. The morning class had already begun, but the Dao Bell did not ring. A few elders walked out of the Dao Palace and looked at the chaotic disciples in the plaza. They asked, "What's going on?" A disciple said in fear, "Elder, the Dao Bell ran away." The elder's expression changed. What? The Dao Bell was an important treasure of Baiyun Mountain. For thousands of years, it had saved the ancestral court from danger several times. Fulu School had always treated it like an ancestor. If anything happened to the Dao Bell, the entire Baiyun Mountain would experience an earthquake. The elders asked in unison, "Where did the Dao Bell go?" A disciple pointed in a certain direction and said, "I saw the Dao Bell go that way just now." The elders flew up at the same time and flew in the direction that the disciple pointed. When they passed by Baiyun Mountain, they suddenly heard a crisp and cheerful bell ring from below. They immediately stopped. Hearing the Dao bell ring again, everyone was relieved. They flew down Baiyun Mountain to investigate. The Dao bell flew away from the main peak during the morning class. This had never happened in decades. They floated in the air and saw a young man standing in the courtyard of the small building on Baiyun Mountain. The Dao bell had shrunk to the size of a palm and was flying around him. It looked extremely cheerful. When they saw the young man's appearance, everyone was stunned. Yesterday, the Dao bell was so scared that it hid in the clouds and did not dare to come out. Why did it become like this today? They had been on Baiyun Mountain for decades, but they had never seen the Dao bell so close to anyone. The thoughts of a spiritual treasure were truly difficult to guess. However, it was fine as long as the Dao bell was still in Fulu school. An elder looked down and said, "Senior Dao bell, the disciples on the main peak are still waiting for you." Limu looked at the Dao bell and said, "That's all for today. I'll continue to help you another day." The Dao bell reluctantly flew around Limu a few times. Then, it drew an arc in the air and flew towards the main peak. Several elders nodded to Limu in the sky, then left with doubtful looks on their faces. The Dao bell held an extraordinary significance to Fulu school. Anything related to the Dao bell was no small matter. After the morning class, in the Dao palace on the main peak, several elders immediately reported this matter to the headmaster. Dao Zhong left the morning class for no reason. This has never happened in the past few decades. There must be something fishy going on. Yesterday, it was very afraid of fellow Daoist Li, but today, it has become so close. There must be a reason. This is an important matter. Sect leader, you must pay attention to it. On the main seat, the white-haired old man pinched his fingers and calculated. Then he said, "He should have something to hide the secrets of the heavens. I can't calculate the relationship between him and the Dao bell." One of the elders said doubtfully, "Why would he have such an item for no reason? He has approached Fulu school several times. There must be some unspeakable secret between him and the Dao bell. Could he be a spy from the demon sect who approached Fulu school with ill intentions towards the Dao bell?" Another Taoist priest said, "Elder Su, you think too highly of the demon sect. Not only is he junior sister Lu's future Taoist companion, but he is also the Empress' favorite minister. Do you think the Empress of Great Zhou would treat a spy from the demon sect as her favorite minister?" "That's true." Elder Su shook his head and asked, "But what happened between him and the Dao bell? I have been in the sect for several decades, but I have never seen such a phenomenon." The Fulu school's head teacher's lips trembled slightly. A moment later, the Dao bell flew in from outside. It circled the Fulu school's head teacher and buzzed for a while. The Fulu school's head teacher stood up and observed the cracks on the Dao bell. Not long after, a look of surprise appeared on his face. He muttered, "There's such a thing." Everyone rarely saw such an expression on the head teacher's face. They asked curiously, "Head teacher, what happened?" The head teacher said, "He is helping the Dao bell repair the cracks on it." The elders could not help but be shocked when they heard this. How is that possible? Repairing the Dao bell requires the origin energy of heaven and earth. The origin energy of heaven and earth is extremely rare. It can only be produced in large quantities when a new Taoist technique is produced. Once the origin energy is produced, it will dissipate soon and cannot be stored. How can he have it? What method did he use to help the Dao bell repair it? The Dao bell buzzed a few more times. The Fulu school's head teacher revealed a look of understanding. He said, "I see." A moment later, they learned the whole story. In the Dao palace on the main peak, the elders looked at each other in shock. Limu really was using the origin energy of heaven and earth produced when a new Taoist technique was produced to repair the Dao bell. This matter was far more unbelievable than him being able to repair the Dao bell. There was no way to verify how the earliest Taoist techniques were created. Most of the Taoist techniques that the current cultivators practiced were inherited from the ancients. However, in every era, there was no lack of outstanding people who could create their own Taoist techniques. These people were often the brightest stars in the night sky of that era. Even the head teacher could not compare to these people. It was not just the head teacher. The transcendence of the 6 Taoist sects, the 4 Buddhist sects, the 10 demonic path sects, the deans of the Great Zhou's 4 great academies, and even the empress of the Great Zhou. These were the strongest people known on the continent. But they were far from being outstanding. They were able to advance to the transcendence realm by relying on the legacies of their sects, academies, and the imperial court. They relied on the influence of their predecessors, and did not rely on themselves. The imperial family had the emperor's qi. The academies and the various sects also had their own legacies. Strictly speaking, they could not be considered true transcendents. A true transcendence expert was someone who transcended the rules and traditions. They created their own Taoist techniques, and were able to embark on their own path of cultivation. Li Mu was clearly not such a genius. If he could create a Taoist technique of this level, a great phenomenon would descend on Mount Baiyun. At that time, everyone would be able to sense it. Even so, the fact that he was able to innovate within the traditional framework was not something an ordinary cultivator could do. At least, no one in the Fulu school could do it. In the current cultivation world, perhaps only some of Xuanzong's seniors had such abilities. The Fulu school was dedicated to researching Fulu. Xuanzong was passionate about researching Taoist techniques. For thousands of years, Xuanzong had made many improvements to the existing Taoist techniques. For example, they shortened the incantations, simplified the hand seals, sped up the casting time, increased the power of the Taoist techniques, and so on. Li Mu had done these. Of course, his Taoist techniques, incantations, and hand seals might not be shorter or fewer, but they were still considered new Taoist techniques. He used this method to obtain the origin power of heaven and earth to help repair the Tao Bell. Elder Su praised. Even so, it's very rare for him to have such an understanding of Taoist techniques at such a young age. Another Taoist priest said, if Senior Miao Dun of Xuanzong knew about this, she would probably regret it very much. Last time, she invited fellow Taoist Li to join Xuanzong. After being rejected, she did not insist. If fellow Taoist Li joins Xuanzong, he will definitely become a prodigy of Xuanzong in the future. The Fulu school's headmaster's eyes lit up. He said, I'm afraid that in the future, a true transcendence expert will appear in Great Zhou. The sect master's words caused the elders to be extremely astonished. Everyone knew very well what a true transcendence expert meant. It had been too many years since a true transcendence expert appeared in the cultivation world. A powerhouse who relied on his own strength to step into the upper realm without relying on an inheritance was far stronger than an ordinary transcendence expert. They did not expect the headmaster to have such a high evaluation of him. At first, they felt that it was too much. Thinking about it carefully, when others cursed the heavens, there was a certain possibility of being struck by lightning. The scene of him cursing the heavens was earth-shattering. Even the Tao Bell cracked because of it. Although his cultivation was not high, in terms of understanding of the heavenly Tao, there were probably not many people who could compare to him. Elder Su thought for a moment and said, if such a person can stay in our Fulu school, it's very likely that he will become a pillar of the ancestral court in the future. Another elder sighed and said, it's too late. Half a year ago it was still possible. Now he's already one of the Empress people. If we keep him in the Fulu school, even if he's willing, the Empress won't be willing. Moreover, he has refused to join the sect twice. This time he probably won't agree. Elder Su thought of something and said with a smile, it's fine. With junior sister Lu here, he's already half a member of the Fulu school. As long as we treat him well, he'll always treat our Fulu school differently. In addition, he's a favored official of the Empress. Perhaps he can further deepen our relationship with the imperial court. After the Tao Bell left, Li Mu waited on Baiyun Peak. According to his guess, the main peak would send someone over soon. The Tao Bell was the most important treasure of the Fulu school. They would definitely not let Li Mu seduce it. They would definitely come to ask about it. In this short period of time, Li Mu had even prepared an excuse. If they asked, he would say that these spells were all inherited from his master. Although they might not believe him, they would not search his soul to confirm it. Not to mention that searching his soul was useless. Even if the Fulu school was one of the 6 great Taoist sects, they would not dare to treat him this way. Now he did not represent himself alone. Behind him stood the Empress and the imperial court. In the Great Zhou, the most powerful force was not the demonic path, nor the 6 schools and 4 great sects. It was the imperial court. Sure enough, as Li Mu expected, after only an hour, someone landed on Baiyun Peak. Li Mu opened the courtyard door and saw an elder standing outside. Li Mu knew that this person's surname was Su. He was an elder of the main peak. Elder Su smiled and asked, "Lord Li, are you used to living here?" Li Mu nodded and said, "The scenery here is pleasant and quiet. It is a good place for cultivation." Elder Su smiled and said, "That's good. If Lord Li has any requests, you can tell me. I will arrange it for you as soon as possible." The talisman puppet sect elder's attitude towards him seemed to be better than before. A trace of suspicion surfaced in Li Mu's heart as he asked, "Elder Su, is there anything important that you're here for?" Elder Su smiled again and said, "I am here on the orders of the headmaster to thank Lord Li for helping to repair the Dao Bell." Li Mu said, "It is my duty. The Dao Bell was damaged because of me. I will do my best to restore it to its original state." Elder Su shook his head and said, "Lord Li did not mean to damage the Dao Bell, but you did mean to repair it. Whether you can repair it or not, the Fulu school owes you a favor." Elder Su's attitude surprised Li Mu. If the Fulu school's attitude towards him before was polite, then this time, it was warm. Not only that, he did not ask about anything else. The reason Li Mu had prepared was useless. Before Elder Su left, he had actually left behind some gifts. There were some spiritual jades of good quality, some alchemical pills that could recover one's magic power, and also talismans that could gather spiritual qi. When Li Mu and the Empress were chatting that night, they brought up this matter. The Empress was silent for a moment, and then asked, "Could it be that the talisman sect is trying to rope you in?" Li Mu said, "Your Majesty, don't worry. I am loyal to your Majesty. I only have your Majesty in my heart. I will not join the Fulu school." Zhou Yi did not seem to be worried about this. He only asked, "Then when will you be back?" Li Mu had 3 months of leave. He had only been away for half a month. Lu Hanyan still had not come out of seclusion. He would need at least 2 months before he could return. But the Empress's tone made Li Mu feel like he was a little wife who did not plan to return home after returning to her mother's home. He could not say that he would return in 2 months. He could only say, "I will be back as soon as possible." Chapter 326. Although Li Mu told the Empress that he would do it as soon as possible, it was definitely not that soon. He did not know when Lu Hanyan would come out of seclusion. After she came out, Li Mu would have to accompany her for at least a month. He would also have to persuade her to come back to Fairy's capital with him as soon as possible. This would probably delay them for a while. Besides, Li Mu also had the heavy responsibility of repairing the Dao Bell. He was the one who cracked the Dao Bell. If he did not take responsibility for it, then what was the difference between him and those scumbags who ran away after cheating a girl's first time? Repairing the Dao Bell was a time-consuming and laborious task. For example, the demon-slaying protective spell, the Tao Te Ching, the 9 syllables mantra, and the like were all very powerful. The first time they were used, they would produce even more origin power. If the Dao Bell did not try to pry into it and only absorb the origin power, it would not only be harmless but also beneficial. Unfortunately, although it was difficult to produce origin power, it was easy to dissipate it. When Li Mu first used it, the Dao Bell was not by Li Mu's side. The origin power had long dissipated. Li Mu could use some small spells and accumulate them. After a few days, the crack on the Dao Bell had only healed by 10 to 20%. If he wanted it to be completely repaired, 2 months would not be enough. Moreover, the spells that he had risked his life to experiment with were almost used up. He still had to spend time trying. Before leaving Mount Baiyun, he could only try his best to help it. After a few more days, Li Mu and the Dao Bell were finally familiar with each other. Its initial fear of Li Mu had long disappeared. Every morning after its morning class, it would fly to his place and only return at night. In addition to helping him repair the cracks, Li Mu had also done some experiments on it in the past few days. The Dao bell was very hard. Even if Li Mu used the Qingxian sword to cut it, it would not leave any mark. Not only was it difficult to be hurt by swords, but it was also immune to spells. At least, all the spells that Li Mu, who was in the transcendent realm, could cast could not shake it at all. It was impervious to lightning, impervious to fire and water, and even if tens of thousands of swords were launched simultaneously, it would not even tremble in the slightest. No wonder the Empress had said that it was the strongest defensive treasure known to the cultivation world. With this treasure, he would be in an invincible position no matter who he fought. Even if the other party was in the transcendent realm, Li Mu wouldn't be able to harm him, and he wouldn't be able to break through the defense of the Dao bell. Of course, Li Mu had never fought against a transcendent powerhouse before. The Fulu school has never forced non-core disciples to stay or leave. I originally wanted to ask junior sister Li why she left, but by the time I found out about this, she had already left the sect. Chapter 327. Last time, when he had parted ways with Li Qing, Li Mu had felt that she seemed to have something on her mind. After learning that she had left the Fulu school, Li Mu was even more certain of this thought. Although the Fulu school had 7 peaks and 7 branches of disciples, from a certain perspective, there were only 2 kinds of disciples in the Fulu school: core disciples and non-core disciples. Core disciples were disciples who had access to the core secrets of the Fulu school. These core secrets were either the Fulu techniques that were not taught to outsiders, or the Taoist techniques that were not taught to non-core disciples. These disciples could not casually leave the Fulu school. Even if they wanted to leave, their memories of the sect's secrets would be erased. Non-core disciples could not come into contact with these secrets. They only cultivated ordinary techniques, and the Fulu Taoist techniques that they studied were also made public. Unlike outsiders, they could obtain certain cultivation resources from the sect by completing sect missions. For example, in the past, Li Qing had worked as a constable in the Yangqiu County government for a year. When she returned to the sect, she could exchange for spiritual jades, transcendent artifacts, and other items for cultivation. Non-core disciples could leave the sect, but very few people did so. After all, since ancient times, the Great Zhou had emphasized etiquette and respect for teachers. This was a tradition engraved in the bones of every person in the Great Zhou. For cultivators, the sect was their home. Almost every cultivator had a strong sense of belonging to their own sect. For a cultivator to leave the sect, it was no different from a mortal severing their relationship with their parents. In the eyes of some extreme people, leaving the sect for no reason was no different from apostasy. Li Mu understood Li Qing very well. She was a person who valued relationships and righteousness. She would not abandon a subordinate that had nothing to do with her. How could she suddenly leave the sect that she had lived in for 10 years? Thinking of how Li Qing seemed to have some hidden troubles before they parted ways, Li Mu was certain that she had left the sect for some reason. When he thought of this, he could not sit still. He was eager to find out why Li Qing was so good at Fulu school. When Li Mu stood up and turned to leave, Hanja asked in surprise, "Where are you going?" Li Mu didn't even turn his head and said, "I have something to do, so I have to go out. Let junior sister Qin accompany you for a few drinks." Hanja looked at junior sister Qin, who was walking towards him, and shook his head. "Junior sister Qin, how many cups can you drink?" A moment later, junior sister Qin carried the drunk Hanja on her back. Li Mu had stayed in White Cloud Peak for a long time, and found that the fortune elders of the various peaks were mostly old men or old women. On the other hand, the officials of the imperial court who were at the 5th level of cultivation were mostly middle-aged. He did not know whether it was because the imperial court controlled the 36 counties and had more abundant cultivation resources, making it easier for them to create experts, or because the strength of the Fulu school was all roaming outside and not in the sect. After Elder Sun walked out of the Purple Cloud Peak Taoist Palace, Elder Su looked at him and said, "This is Lord Li, an honored guest of our Fulu school. He has a friend who used to be on the 7th peak. He came to the Purple Cloud Peak to ask about the situation of that disciple." Elder Sun smiled and said, "Since you are an honored guest of our sect, let's go in and talk." After entering the Taoist palace on the left, Elder Su introduced to Li Mu. In the Purple Cloud Peak, Elder Sun is responsible for the admission and departure of disciples. If Lord Li has any questions, you can ask Elder Sunday. Li Mu nodded and looked at Elder Sunday. He asked, "Elder Sun, do you know Li Qing?" "Li Qing?" Elder Sun was startled at first, then a look of pity appeared on his face. He said, what a pity, what a pity. She was originally one of the most outstanding disciples of the Purple Cloud Peak. After the grand competition of the peaks, she would have definitely become a core disciple. Unfortunately, she left the sect before the competition. This is a loss to the Purple Cloud Peak. Li Mu continued asking, "Elder Sun, do you know why she left the sect?" Elder Sun shook his head and said, "She didn't say the reason. I tried my best to persuade her that if she had any difficulties, she could tell the sect. However, she was determined to leave, so I didn't try to persuade her anymore. The sect has never restricted the departure of disciples." After coming to the Purple Cloud Peak, Li Mu's heart was not at ease. Instead, it was hanging by a thread. Based on his understanding of Li Qing, she would definitely not leave the sect that had nurtured her for 10 years for no reason. Previously, when the two of them were on a mission together, Li Mu could clearly feel that she had a strong sense of belonging to the Fulu school. In her heart, leaving the sect was tantamount to betrayal. What had happened to her that she did not hesitate to leave the sect and cut ties with the Fulu school? Li Mu suddenly remembered the way Li Qing looked at him when he parted ways with her. At that time, her eyes were filled with confusion and conflict, but in the end, she still chose to leave. It was as if she was cutting ties with Li Mu. If she had encountered something and wanted to cut ties with Li Mu could understand. Based on her personality, she would never let her own matters implicate Li Mu. Under her name, there were no other words. Other than her name, where she came from, and who else was in her family, there was nothing. Elder Su also noticed the abnormality. Looking at Elder Sun, he asked, "What's going on?" Elder Sun scratched his head, also somewhat puzzled. Logically speaking, such a situation should not have occurred, unless she did not enter the sect through the normal method. As for the specific method, I'm afraid only the elder who guided her into the sect back then would know. There was no record in Li Qing's file. Elder Sun asked the other elders, but none of them knew. In the past 10 years, the positions of the elders of the various peaks had changed, and some had even died due to unknown reasons. To find the elder who guided Li Qing into the sect back, then would probably require the full power of the Fulu school. This trip could be considered a fruitless one. As they flew out of Violet Cloud Peak, Elder Su said to Li Mu, "Lord Li, don't worry. I will help you keep an eye on this matter. If there is any news, I will inform you immediately." Li Mu clasped his hands together and said, "Thank you, Elder Su." Elder Su smiled and said, "It's no trouble at all." Li Mu's gaze inadvertently looked down, and he saw that the mountain path below was densely packed with people. Waves of mana could be faintly felt, and he asked curiously, "Why are there so many cultivators down there?" Elder Su explained, "In 5 days, it will be the Talisman Dao trial that is held once every 4 years. During each trial, the various peaks will choose a few seedlings who are adept at the Talisman Dao from these cultivators, and accept them as disciples." For a large sect like the Fulu school, the legacy of the sect was extremely important. Li Mu had seen this before. They sent people to the various government offices, and through the household register, they found various talents with special constitutions. After accepting them as disciples, they nurtured them from a young age. Compared to that method, accepting disciples through the trial was obviously less costly and more effective. The 6 schools and 4 sects were the blessed lands in the hearts of all cultivators. Joining these sects meant that one could use the resources of the sect, and receive the guidance of the sect's experts. Therefore, cultivators flocked to these sections. At this moment, Li Mu saw no less than 100 people below. Elder Su looked down and said with some pride, "Thousands of people participate in each trial of our sect. The final winner will receive a talisman. With this talisman, one can directly become a core disciple of our sect." As he spoke, he suddenly slapped his head and said, "I remember now. No wonder the name Li Qing sounds familiar to me. 11 years ago, someone used a talisman to exchange for her opportunity to enter the sect. I was the one who personally handled it." Li Mu raised his eyebrows and asked, "The talisman can be used by others?" Elder Su nodded and said, "It can. However, if the talisman is not used by the trial champion, but is only given to someone else, then the person who enters the sect through the talisman can only be an ordinary disciple." Li Mu thought for a moment and asked, "Can I participate in the Fulu trial?" Elder Su was stunned for a moment and nodded. "You can. As long as you are a cultivator under the age of 30, you can participate in the trial." He sized up Li Mu and asked, "But does Lord Li know anything about Fulu?" Li Mu nodded and said, "I know a little." Chapter 328. Elder Su looked at Li Mu. Seeing that he was serious, he could only say, "If Lord Li wants to try, I will arrange it for you after I return to the main peak." There was something he did not say out loud for the sake of his face. If he only had a slight understanding of the Fulu Dao, he might not even be able to pass the first stage of the trial. Every 4 years, the ancestral court held a trial of the Dao of Talismans. This trial also had the purpose of selecting the best disciples. During each trial, there would be thousands or even tens of thousands of cultivators coming from all over the Great Zhou and even other countries. These cultivators all wanted to join the Fulu school and become a disciple of a large sect. They wanted to embark on a broader path of cultivation. The people who participated in the trial traveled a long way. Every one of them had some confidence in their Fulu Dao. Even so, less than 1 out of 100 people could pass the trial in the end. Those who could last until the end were all true masters of the Fulu Dao. Every path of cultivation was very difficult. A cultivator could only be proficient in one path. A cultivator who was proficient in the Fulu Dao would find it difficult to invest a lot of time in divine arts, alchemy, artifact forging, formation, and martial Dao. They would not have deep attainments in these areas. In Elder Su's eyes, Li Mu's attainments in divine arts had clearly reached the peak. He was among the top geniuses. If such a person was also proficient in the Fulu Dao, the heavens would be too unfair. He originally wanted to remind Li Mu that if he only had a slight understanding of the Fulu Dao, there was no need for him to participate in the trial of the Dao of Talismans. After thinking about it, he felt that this would hurt his pride too much. It would be better to let him hit a wall once. He would know how much he was worth in the Fulu Dao. After parting with Elder Su, Li Mu flew towards White Cloud Peak. This trip to Purple Cloud Peak was not without any gains. He found out through Elder Sun's investigation that Li Qing had entered the Fulu school 11 years ago, and had entered the sect through special channels. Someone had wasted the opportunity to become a core disciple of the Fulu school, and used a talisman to send her into the Fulu school. Originally, the Jade Slip should have recorded the information of the disciples who had entered the sect in detail. Why did it only have her name? What was her identity? What was she carrying? Why did she suddenly leave Fulu school? Li Mu's heart was filled with one mystery after another. He had no way of knowing all these, but he could confirm that Li Qing must have met with something. And it must be something grave, something that could endanger her life. Li Mu's heart was burning with anxiety, but he had nowhere to go and was powerless to do anything. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something, and a ray of light appeared in his mind. Just now, he was so worried that he actually forgot an important point. As long as he could find the original owner of that talisman, wouldn't he be able to figure out what had happened to Li Qing? The Dao of Talismans trial was only held once every 4 years, and the person that obtained the first every year would surely be the center of attention. It was difficult to find Li Qing, but wasn't it easy to find him? Li Mu flew back to the main peak. This time he did not ask Dao Zhong to invite Elder Su, but paid a visit in person. After only a quarter of an hour, he saw Li Mu again. Elder Su asked in surprise, "Lord Li, is there anything else?" Li Mu went straight to the point and asked, "Elder Su must have an impression of the first person in each Tao of Talismans trial, right?" "Of course," Taoist priest Su Chong said. "For years ago, the first person in the Tao of Talismans trial is now a core disciple of the main peak. 2 years ago, he stepped into Dongxian. 8 years ago, the first person in the Tao of Talismans trial did not stay in the ancestral court, but he established a branch of the Fulu school. 12 years ago, that person from 12 years ago used his talisman in exchange for Li Qing's opportunity to enter the sect." Li Mu hurriedly asked, "Who was that person from 12 years ago?" Elder Su shook his head and said, "Because he didn't stay in the ancestral court, nor did he join the Fulu school. I don't remember his information. Lord Li, please wait a moment, I'll check for you." He walked out of the Taoist palace, and after a while, he came back and said, "I've found it. That person's name is Li Er. 12 years ago he only left this name. Li Er Li Qing. Could Li Qing be his daughter? However, the name Li Er should be just a pseudonym. No one would have such a strange name." Li Mu said seriously, "This matter is very important to me. I want to know the ins and outs of what happened back then. I'll have to trouble Elder Su." Elder Su had never seen Li Mu so serious. After thinking for a while, he said, "I'll check who was in charge of the Talisman Dao trial back then. He should know more than me." He walked into the Taoist palace and came out a moment later. He took out a fulu, transmitted a few words to the fulu, and threw the fulu into the air. The talisman turned into a paper crane and flew out of the Taoist palace. Not long after, an old woman flew in from the outside. After the old woman came in, she asked directly, "Senior Brother Su, why are you looking for me?" Elder Su looked at the old woman and asked, "Junior Sister Chen, I remember that you were in charge of the Talisman Dao trial 12 years ago. Do you still remember the first place of the trial?" The old woman was stunned and said, "Why do you suddenly ask this?" Taoist priest Su Chong said, "Don't ask this first. He didn't know whether to enter or leave." Li Mu also noticed the abnormality behind him. When he turned around and met Elder Su's eyes, his expression gradually became awkward. Chapter 329. Li Mu looked at Elder Su, and Elder Su also looked at him. The situation was very awkward. In the end, it was Elder Su who broke the awkwardness. He coughed lightly and walked into the courtyard. He said, "I have brought Lord Li's trial letter." Since he did not mention what happened just now, Li Mu naturally would not mention it either. He accepted the trial letter and said, "Thank you, Elder Su." Taoist priest Su Chong said, "In 5 days when the trial begins, I will inform Lord Li again." Li Mu nodded and said, "Okay." Elder Su cupped his hands and said, "I will take my leave first." Li Mu cupped his hands and returned the greeting. "Take care, Elder Su." After a polite exchange, Elder Su turned and left. In the spiritual snail, the Empress thought for a while and said, "Why don't you capture him and I will teach you how to erase his memory?" Li Mu hurriedly said, "No need, no need." Li Mu represented the Empress in the cooperation with the Fulu school. He could sit down and talk with the Fulu school's headmaster. There was no need to erase Elder Su's memory. Moreover, no one would believe him if he said that he wanted to become the headmaster of the Fulu school, with just a little theurgy. In fact, Elder Su, who walked out of the small hut, really scoffed at Li Mu's words just now. To become the headmaster of the Fulu school, he first had to become a core disciple of the Fulu school. Just this alone was enough to completely block him out. The fastest way to become a core disciple of the Fulu school was to participate in the trial of the Tao of Talismans. He had to defeat thousands of cultivators who were proficient in the Tao of Talismans and win first place in the trial. This was only the first step of his plan. The second step was to cultivate hard and break through to the creation realm. Only then could he become an elder. The third step was to break through to the Dongxian realm from the creation realm. Only then could he become the headmaster. It was easy to go from divine ability to creation. At most, it would take a few decades. Once the magic power was enough, success would follow naturally. However, when the creation realm came to Dongxian, what was tested was one's talent and comprehension. The Fulu school had more than 100 creation elders, but only a few first seats. As for the fourth step, becoming the sect master, he still had to break through to the seventh realm and wait for the current sect master to abdicate before he could succeed the position of sect master. Even if there was such a day, it would be decades or centuries later. By then, the great Zhou might have had several emperors. Elder Su just smiled lightly before tossing this matter to the back of his mind. And then he flew towards the main peak. The Tao of Talismans trial this time was presided over by him, and he still had many things to do. Inside the small building, this meant that all the cultivators had to successfully draw an exorcism talisman within the time it took for an incense stick to burn. Moreover, they only had 3 chances. After failing 3 times, they would not have the materials to draw a talisman. Cultivators being able to draw a Fulu and cultivators being able to draw a Fulu in one try were 2 completely different concepts. Some people could draw an exorcism talisman, but they had to fail multiple times and waste many sets of materials before succeeding. Such a person could not be considered to have Fulu talent. White Cloud Mountain. Main peak. There was a huge screen in the sky above the square. On the screen was the situation on the platform. The elders chatted and laughed as they watched the situation on the screen. How long do you think it will take for these people to successfully draw an exorcism talisman? Those who pass will be able to draw it in half an incense stick's time. After that, even if they can draw it, they will not be able to pass the subsequent trials. I remember that in the past trials, the fastest person to draw this talisman took 20 breaths. It was 12 years ago, right? I still remember that Li Er. He was a true talisman Dao genius. 20 breaths. Many elders in the sect can't do it that fast. As the elders were discussing, a beam of light suddenly lit up on the screen. The square fell silent for a moment before an uproar broke out. Someone finished drawing so quickly? How many breaths have passed this time? Less than 10 breaths. That's way too fast. How is that possible? Could there be a 6th realm cultivator among the cultivators? Is that a senior joking? Everyone looked at the screen, which quickly zoomed in on a certain spot on the platform. The elders widened their eyes, wanting to see who could draw an exorcism talisman in such a short time. However, all they saw was a cloud of fog. Everyone could not help but be stunned. What's going on? Why is there fog on the trial platform? Who can go and see what's happening on the trial platform? Someone reacted quickly and said, "That's not fog on the trial platform. He has a Dharma treasure on him that conceals heavenly secrets." Elder Su stood up abruptly with a stunned expression. "It's him." Chapter 330. On the main peak square, the group of elders looked at the figure shrouded in clouds on the trial platform through the image above, their faces filled with shock. Although the exorcism talisman was the most basic Fulu, even they would need 10 or even 20 breaths to complete it. The success of the talisman was mainly related to 2 factors. First, whether or not the talisman could be drawn in one go. Second, whether or not the talisman was stable in the process of drawing. It was not easy to draw the Fulu in one go without any ripples in the talisman. One had to ensure the calmness of the heart. If the talisman was slightly impatient, the talisman would be wrong, or the talisman would be too unstable, and the talisman would fail. If the talisman failed, not only would it waste time and energy, it would also waste precious materials. Therefore, in the process of talisman drawing, cultivators would try their best to remain calm and write at a steady pace, ensuring that the talisman was complete and the talisman was stable. Naturally, the talisman drawing speed would not be too fast. To be able to draw the exorcism talisman in 10 breaths, one had to have a high level of cultivation, and one's control of the body and the talisman had reached the peak. Or one had practiced the exorcism talisman for tens of thousands of times. Even if one was in the soul refining stage, they would still be able to draw the talisman quickly and accurately. But generally speaking, no one would spend so much time and energy on a low-level fulu. Regardless of the reason, the fact that this person could complete the first stage of the trial in 10 breaths was enough to attract their attention. Unfortunately, this person was shrouded in clouds, preventing them from seeing his true appearance. One of the main peak elders looked at Elder Su and asked, "Senior Su, this person, could it be?" Elder Su had already come back to his senses. He nodded and said, "Other than him, who else could it be?" On the trial platform, Li Mu finished the last stroke of the exorcism talisman. The stone platform in front of him suddenly lit up. Beside him, a cultivator who was at the critical moment of drawing the talisman was shocked by this abnormality. His hand trembled, and the talisman was crooked. The first talisman paper was ruined. The cultivator looked down at the ruined talisman paper and blurted out, "Motherf asterisk cur." The stone platform lit up, indicating that the person beside him had successfully completed the fulu. After that person cursed in his heart, he looked at the young man behind the stone platform with a shocked expression and said in his heart, "How could he be so fast?" He looked at the burning incense in front of the stone platform, and didn't dare to think any further. He had already wasted a chance and only had 2 talisman papers left. He had to truly and completely master the exorcism talisman, and not rely on luck to draw talismans. If one made a single mistake out of 10 times, all previous efforts would be wasted. This was not only a test of their Tao of talismans, but also their mental fortitude. Those who could maintain their calm under such pressure and successfully draw talismans were the talents that the Fulu school wanted. Of course, it wasn't difficult for Li Mu to discern from these 2 trials that even if the talisman sect was wealthy and overbearing, it wasn't willing to waste resources. So the cultivators that didn't have a high success rate in drawing talismans would be completely eliminated during the first 2 trials. Li Mu picked up his brush and began to draw talismans. On the main peak square, a group of elders and many disciples of the Fulu school were watching the live broadcast of the trial. This stage won't be easy for them. It's not just them. Some disciples of other sects may not be able to draw 10 Fulu talismans without making a single mistake. 12 years ago, that person only took 15 minutes. He was the fastest person to complete the second stage of the trial in all of history. I wonder if there will be any surprises this year. While the crowd was chatting, it didn't take long for another ray of light to appear on the screen. This time, not only the elders, but even the spectating disciples in the square, let out a cry of surprise. It's fake, right? Not even 15 minutes? This person can't be an octopus demon, right? Although the exorcism talisman is very simple, drawing 10 of them can't be that fast. On the square, the image zoomed in, and a blurry figure appeared in front of them again. In the next moment, someone exclaimed, "It's him again." I know, he must know that the first 2 stages of the trial tested the basics of the Fulu. He deliberately practiced it. Give me a year and a half, and if I only practiced the exorcism talisman, I could be faster than him. But if he does this, he will be eliminated in the 3rd stage, not to mention the 4th stage. On the square, after a moment of surprise, all the disciples calmed down. It was only an exorcism talisman, and no matter how skilled one was in cultivating it, it was of no great use. At most, one could be a wandering physician in the mortal world or sell protective talismans to deceive mortals. It was impossible to rely on an exorcism talisman to pass the trial in the talisman Tao of the talisman sect's ancestral court. Most of the disciples didn't have a high evaluation of this person's attainments in the Tao of talismans. There were only 2 possibilities for him to be able to draw the exorcism talisman so skillfully. First, his dermic energy was very strong, and it was at least at the 6th level. But how could a 6th level expert participate in the trial of the Tao of talismans? So this possibility was directly eliminated. Chapter 331. The third round of the Talisman Dao trial had begun. Several golden runes appeared in the sky in front of the trial platform. These runes formed a fulu. The moment he saw the rune, Li Mu had some doubts in his heart. Because he had never seen this fulu before. Li Mu had already learned all the basic fulu during his time at fulu school. He was sure that this fulu was not any type that he had seen before. The other trial takers on the other platforms also had stunned expressions on their faces. What rune is this? Why have I never seen it before? How do you draw a fulu that you have never seen before? At this moment, Elder Su's voice was heard. Those who successfully draw this rune within 4 hours will pass the third round and enter the final round of the trial. Countless talisman papers and cinnabar flew in from outside the platform. This time, there were 100 talisman papers. The Talisman Dao trial this time seemed to be different from the previous ones. Li Mu looked up at the golden runes above and somewhat understood the Fulu school's purpose. The first 2 rounds tested the trial taker's basic skills. The third round tested the trial taker's talent. Those common Fulu, even those without talent, could be drawn skillfully after thousands of practice over a long period of time. Passing the first 2 rounds only meant that they had a solid foundation in the exorcism talisman. It did not mean anything. But for a new Fulu, the result was different. Those with outstanding talent in the Talisman Dao might be able to grasp it in a few hours. Those with average talent would need a few days, or even 10 days to half a month. This Fulu was not in the talisman books that Li Mu had seen before. It should be a new Fulu created by the Fulu school. He had never seen a Fulu before. He did not know the order of writing the runes, or the strength of his dermic powers when writing the runes. He had to test them one by one. Li Mu picked up the brush and dipped it in cinnabar. He closed his eyes and pondered for a while before starting to write. He finished drawing the runes in one go, but his magic power was not sealed in the rune paper. This meant that he had failed. I can't inject my magic power. The order of the runes is wrong. Li Mu thought for a moment and picked up the brush again. He changed the order of writing the runes, but he still couldn't seal the magic power. Li Mu lowered his head and looked at the ruined talisman paper. He thought to himself. During the last 2 strokes, the mana leaked out. It's because the mana input was too strong and exceeded the upper limit of this talisman. Again. On the square of the main peak, an elder who had been staring at Li Mu said, "He has already failed twice." Another elder Taoist priest said, "It's normal. A new Fulu, even if you and I have it in our hands, we can't succeed in one try. We have to try many times. However, this talisman is not complicated. If he really has talent in the Talisman Dao, 4 hours is enough. After 4 hours, even if he succeeds, his future achievements will be limited." He looked at Elder Su and asked, "Senior Su, do you think he can succeed?" Elder Su shook his head and said, "I don't know. However, if he really wins this trial, there will be a big problem." At this moment, if he still didn't know that Li Mu's a little, and his understanding of the a little were not the same, he would not be qualified to be an elder of the main peak. From the first 2 trials, Li Mu's performance showed that he was definitely not a Talisman Dao newbie. And in the third trial he only failed twice and found the correct order of writing the runes. As long as he tried a few more times, he would be able to find the limit of his dermic powers and successfully write the runes. In this way, he could immediately enter the 4th trial, which was also the last trial. This seemed to be getting closer to his plan of seizing power in the Fulu school. At that time, Elder Su only thought that it was an unrealistic joke. It was not until he saw Li Mu overcome all obstacles in the Talisman Dao trial that a sense of crisis arose in his heart. He couldn't be serious, could he? Just as this concern arose in Elder Su's heart, on the screen above his head, a ray of light swept across. The main peak square was in an uproar. It appeared. Who is so fast? This is the new Fulu that was just designed by the headmaster. No one can know in advance. I can't see his face clearly. Why is it a cloud of fog? Isn't this the person who was the fastest in the first and second trials? Li Mu could not hear the discussions of the people in the main peak square. In his 7th trial, he finally succeeded in sealing his dermic powers into the talisman paper and drew the nameless Fulu. Under extreme calmness and without any fluctuations in his heart, drawing talismans was simply successful. He already had some doubts in his heart that in the other world, the art of tranquility did not exist for the purpose of drawing talismans. The moment he finished drawing the fulu and put down the brush, the stone platform beside him rolled him up and flew off the platform, landing on another mountain peak. The stone platform put him down and returned along the original path. Elder Su stood on the mountain peak and looked at Li Mu with a complicated expression. He cupped his hands and said, "Congratulations, Lord Li, for being the first to complete the first 3 trials." Li Mu cupped his hands and returned the greeting. He said politely, "I was lucky." He looked at Elder Su and asked, "What is the 4th trial?" Elder Su pointed to the front and said, "This is the 4th trial." Li Mu looked in the direction that he pointed and saw rows of stone steps that extended into the depths of the clouds. After 10 breaths, he opened his eyes again. Li Mu narrowed his eyes. He was still standing here and was not sent down. This meant that he had already drawn the 43rd fulu. That person did not even look at Li Mu and walked to the next step. After a while, he opened his eyes again and stepped onto the 45th step. On the square of the main peak, many disciples and elders had looks of disbelief on their faces. In the past, it was already a surprise to have someone reach the 20th step. This year, someone actually reached the 40th step, and there are 2 of them. Who's the one who caught up from behind? He looks so young. He took less time to reach each step than the first person. I wonder which step he will reach in the end? In the Dao Palace on the main peak, several first seats and the talisman puppet sect leader also had an image in front of them. The image depicted the situation on the stone steps. At this moment, Li Mu, whose entire body was covered in fog, stopped at the 43rd step. That young man had already reached the 47th step. Hyun Jinko looked at the figure at the front and said, "There's something wrong with this person." The Fulu school's first seat looked at the person at the front through the mystic light technique. A golden light flashed in his eyes as he shook his head and said, "Let's not bother about him for now." He looked at Li Mu with admiration and said, "It's Li Mu who really surprised me." Hyun Jinko nodded and said with a strange look in his eyes, "It's not just a surprise. It's simply unbelievable. If I could turn back time, I would kidnap him even if I had to. He has the hope of the Fulu school." Zheng Yangzi looked at the person at the front and said, "I wonder who is so bold to come to White Cloud Mountain and cause trouble. Won't this talisman Dao trial become a joke because of him?" The Fulu school's headmaster looked at Li Mu and said with a smile, "That might not be the case." On the 43rd step, Li Mu looked ahead, took a deep breath, and took a step forward. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.